Like, listen, Art, I don't like Stanley.
Stanley, the Navy man, thinks he's so wise. He reads all
I think the only person I
books
have
with
been
the
was Stanley.
squint in his eyes, spins still so wild, like ships in the sky. But whose words
And
are
Nate, Stanley
those?
doesn't state the obvious. Like,
You don't think one parent influence is detrimental?
yes, he does.
I literally said they need to understand
American
that
culture.
it's a white
If they
people
want to
problem.
beef with you,
Okay,
it's called Stanley versus the world.
And just assume their character by stereotype?
I think people do that every day.
Okay, I didn't ask you.
Do I think it's okay?
All right, everybody. I'm Matt Lewis, and after a week off, I'm so excited to be reunited, and it feels so good with Charlie Sykes. How you doing, man?
Well, we survived last week, and we're now really kind of in the official. We have survived May. It is June 1st. How did that happen?
It is.
How did we get to June?
It's amazing. My unofficial summer has now started, and the kids have a few more days of school, and then things get wild, as Donald Trump might say. Charlie Sykes.
They do. So last week we had a lot of things going on. You know what the image that really sticks with me? That really is for some reason I just keep coming back to it, and I want to reprint it in my newsletter every single day. Those before and after pictures of the White House, what Donald Trump has done to the White House. You see this pristine White House, with the South Lawn and everything, and then you see what it looks like today. The East Wing is a hole in the ground, and he's building that giant iron cage for his UFC match to celebrate American independence. I mean, it really looks what Kevin Williamson wrote, how, that it hasn't taken us long to go from the greatest generation to the white trash generation. He just completely enshittified the White House. You know what I'm talking about? Those images are really something. They feel
stark contrast.
Really symbolic, but also
It's
symbolic.
Yeah, it's a metaphor of a lot. And, I had David Frum on the pod last week, and he was basically talking about America's first centennial. It's all about innovation, inventions, ideas. The second centennial, it's about unity. There's this regatta, British boats and American boats, and it's about big things. And now it's about cage matches and gladiatorial, and just aesthetically. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Do you remember Tucker Carlson was talking about architecture and how beauty really matters, and that any civilization that gives up beauty, that it actually it's a downward spiral. And I'm like, well, here we go. We're there.
This was a choice. Well, actually, you mentioned David Frum. In my newsletter today, I'm going to quote him, where he basically says that we're having a royalist celebration, right? We've taken the anniversary of Independence Day, July 4th, the first No King's Day, and Donald Trump has turned it into a royalist celebration of himself, seeking to emblazon his face on coinage, currency, displaying his image on banners in downtown Washington, and scheduling, of course, this match. And then, of course, over the weekend, he decided that we weren't going to have that concert after all the musicians dropped out. My favorite story. And instead, we're going to have a MAGA rally.
Yes. Let me read them.
Donald Trump.
The Great American State Fair recently had several musical guests back out, partly over the event's ties to Donald Trump. Now Trump himself is slated to headline the festivities. I understand artists are getting the yips having to do with their performance, Trump posted on Truth Social, adding he was thinking of bringing, quote, the man who had some say in the greatest president in history, the GOAT, Donald J. Trump, to take the place of these highly paid third-rate artists. And of course, Charlie, several artists, including Bret Michaels, the Commodores, and Martina McBride dropped out last week. But never fear, Flo Rida, Fab of Milli Vanilli, and Vanilla Ice are still planning on being there.
So this is beyond parody, but you still get Milli Vanilli. So yeah, this thing fell apart. And of course, then he lashes out at the third-rate artists. These are the ones he chose, first of all. They were the artists that he had because he's still stuck in the 1980s or something. So in some ways, it's a clarifying event in case there's any doubt about what this Freedom 250 was about. It's all about Donald Trump. And, and again, going back to David Frum, Donald Trump could have gone a different way, right? I mean, this guy knows how to put on a show. He's actually pretty good at putting on shows and extravaganzas, right? And this might have been a way to, I don't know, rehabilitate himself as an unpopular second-term president. All he had to do was not be an out-of-control, insane egomaniac just for a little while, and he failed. So maybe we'll now have a rethinking. People will think, well, what exactly is the birthday? What are we celebrating? What happened 250 years ago? And what's going on right now?
It is sad. I do think this casts a pall over what should be a huge celebration, just a huge moment for us all to come together as Americans. And just that image you were talking about, how, he has just desecrated the White House, tearing down of the East Wing. I mean, if you look at the juxtaposition of the way the White House looked 6 months ago, even, beautiful. And he has just destroyed it. And it is just a physical manifestation of, I think, an inner sickness inside Donald Trump and maybe inside American politics today. So it is very sad. And, we'll try to celebrate, Let Freedom Ring. We'll play some Martina McBride, a song actually about somebody killing their husband. But never mind that. It's patriotic.
So do you think the MAGA rally will go on? Because this is in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean,
not exactly.
Welcome to Stanley versus the World, everyone. Happy Monday. Just a quick note. We're predicted to have some bad weather at some point. There's a severe thunderstorm watch, and it's looking pretty evil out there. So, for some reason or another, I lose internet or something. That'll be the end of the show. But it's rare that I lose power, so I'm not super worried about it. But you never know. Everybody, please make sure you hit the like button. If you are new to the show, please subscribe to the show. We will entertain you, or we will not. What's up, CK? So anyway, I stopped this for a reason, and now I can't remember why. The MAGA rally, since all these rock stars or these kind of classic acts like the Commodores were going to play. If there is a MAGA rally during like a 250th birthday anniversary, I'm basically going to just say, hey, that is the end of America as we've known it. July 4th should be anything but political. And a MAGA rally, maybe Trump's just doing it to own the libs or something. But I'm telling you right now, politicizing the 250th anniversary of the United States, that is the wrong move. If there is anything that's going to split this country apart, it's politicizing the founding, politicizing the 250th anniversary. So enough said on that. Let's see. Oh, really? Is he live now? I didn't even realize, CK. Let him cry, because I think it's hilarious. Maybe we'll tune in.
The center of MAGA support.
Well, there's always going to be, he can throw a rally, he can give a speech, there's going to be fireworks, but this was supposed to be like a weeks-long celebration, right? That's the problem. I mean, if it's just the 4th of July, that's one thing, but, there's going to obviously be this UCF fight at the Octagon, which is not being constructed.
And they're inviting, and they're trying to recruit soldiers. Did you read that?
But they have to be of a certain height and size and weight and stuff to get it.
Was 0.55 height waist ratio or something like that?
I mean, could you imagine being turned away? Like, you could be a high-ranking. There's plenty of pudgy, high-ranking military officials who may not be
Well,
being turned away
it is.
at the gate.
I don't think that Trump necessarily will match that. By the way,
No
so
way.
so late on Friday night, before we forget this, late on Friday night, they actually did release his medical report that he's in great medical shape and everything. But then over the weekend, I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a cold here. Over the weekend, he goes on these insane, absolutely insane tweet storms, bleach storms. I mean, you follow this. 1 a.m, he's up. He's up all night. It's almost as if it's not cognitive decline. It's like there's something really. I mean, they're crazy, and I'm sorry. It's like maybe we're like focusing on cognitive decline when we should actually be focusing on the fact that the Mad King is mad.
Yeah. Well, Charlie, a lot going on. Let me ask you about this Graham Plattner, okay? So he's obviously the presumptive nominee in Maine, although my friend Bill Scher is launching a little campaign at Washington Monthly to get Janet Mills back in the race in Maine. I don't know if that's going to happen, but this week, Plattner suffered the latest in a string of setbacks when the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times reported he exchanged sexually explicit texts with at least a half dozen women while married. And this comes on top of all the other stuff, the Nazi tattoo.
You know what? People can clutch their pearls about this, and I'm not a huge Plattner fan, but people can clutch their pearls about sexting while married and all this. We have a president that's done worse. Sexting is not necessarily acting on the impulse. Yeah, it doesn't look good, but we are way past the days when Bill Clinton was running for president and the mantra was character matters. We are well beyond those halcyon old days. Character apparently no longer matters, and the guy we got in the White House right now is proof of that.
Saying that he was a communist, saying that black people don't tip well, saying that most white people actually are racist, that kind of thing. So, there's two schools of thought here, right? My friend Bill Scher thinks that Plattner should get out and that Mills should be the nominee. Other people say, have you looked at Donald Trump lately? Like, this is what the public.
Well, what about it?
This isn't a damn, Daisy show or something. This is the new normal. But what do you think of that?
No, it is not whataboutism. By the way, Janet Mills, who I think is she the current governor of Maine? She's 78. She shouldn't be running. Let's not do that. You give the people what they want. Shit, the people wanted Donald Trump. So Graham Plattner, is he really any worse? As a matter of fact, he just sounds like a left version of a Donald Trump type, except he actually has worked for a living.
Well, you wrote a piece, I believe, last week after Ken Paxton won in Texas. Basically, saying there are no standards anymore. There used to be red lines, and if you did this or that you would know. In 2026, are there any red lines? Are there any disqualifying stories? There certainly are not in Republican primaries, right? But the problem in Maine is it's painful. You would think that in Maine they would have a third choice. Janet Mills was a weak candidate, too old. There's not a third person up there because what's happening is two things happening. Number one, Graham Plattner's got a lot of baggage. I think he's going to survive this particular story because I think it's going to be private, unless of course we find out what the contents of these texts are. We haven't seen that, so
they may come out. Yeah,
shoes may drop. But I think that the fact that his wife is pushing back so hard, he's probably going to survive this. But it is the weight of all of these scandals, and it's Maine, and Susan Collins is not Ted Cruz. I mean, Susan Collins has been elected up there. This should have been a gimme for the Democrats. It's a very strongly Democratic state. She is incredibly weak, but it's hard when you're making the lesser of two evils to make she's the most evil person. The other thing is that Graham Plattner is not reaching out to moderate voters in any way whatsoever. He's really running a full on, we're just going to turn out the leftist base. Maybe that works in Maine. But I think the most troubling thing, though, and David French has highlighted this, is watching Democrats do what Republicans did 10 years ago by constantly moving the window of acceptable behavior. That they find themselves defending a guy with a Nazi tattoo, and the
Yeah.
more you look into that, it's But I understand that we're all in this existential election, right? That the stakes are so high, we are going to overlook anything. If the person's a criminal, if he's been indicted, because
Yeah.
Republicans down in Texas, if the guy has a Nazi tattoo, and this is the world that we live in right now. So we're Democrats, and some people listening to us won't like this, but if you're wondering, like, why would Republicans, go along with some of the conduct of some of these people? Like, well, okay, go through the logic of why you're going to go along with Graham Plattner, because it's so important to win that election. That winning that election is more important than any consideration of character, what they're going through. But um,
Let me play devil's advocate
there's some
here.
damage. Yeah, yeah. I could go either
We're
way.
not hiring a pastor in Maine. Democrats need to stop
Should do it.
trying to find flawless humans. In fact, that's what's been so off-putting about Democrats is that they've tried to impose these litmus tests, these morality tests. We're all flawed people. And what Democrats need is someone who can fight. They need a fighter. And the other thing, too, is, look, I'm not going to say that Graham Plattner is like a savior or is perfect, but he could be part of a larger plan, Charlie. He could be being used maybe to advance a cause and bring back America, to restore America. And we know that sometimes flawed people have been used to do such a thing, such a job as that. So David French and I recently had this debate too, and I really respect David, but he may not know
People
what
know
time
what-
it is.
People know what you just did. Okay, there may be viewers who do not understand what you just did. Go ahead, come on. Every argument that you just read to me comes
It's
from where?
verbatim what evangelical Christians said about Donald Trump to defend
Word
him.
for word.
Yeah.
See, this is exactly because and for those of you that were nodding your head when Matt was going, yes, absolutely, really good logic. This is exactly what we heard back in 2016. So again, deep breath. Is he do damage to beat Susan Collins? I mean, at this point, you have to understand how heavily, how much did Kamala Harris win Maine by? I think it was double digits. Any reasonable candidate ought to be competitive or ahead of Susan Collins. But and maybe the national mood will be so strong. But
Yeah. Well, here's
let's
the
be
other
honest
thing,
about it.
Charlie.
Graham Plattner is a damaged candidate, and that's a seat the Democrats need to win.
Let me make one more argument that you might have heard before. It doesn't matter what Graham Plattner did. They're going to destroy him anyway. Look at James Tallarico. This kid is a seminarian. He is a Boy Scout. And they're destroying him. They're attacking him, saying he's gay, saying he's trans, literally. All of this stuff is true. Calling him a vegan, them's fighting words in Texas. So it doesn't matter. You could have nominated a squeaky clean, Sunday school student in Maine. They'll find a way to try to destroy him. So why not just go with Graham Plattner, someone who actually might connect with Joe's six-pack up there?
Well, it might be. So can we talk about the Tallarico thing, because
We should.
that is an amazing story, and first of all, the choice of Ken Paxton as the nominee. I mean, I almost hesitate to say what that tells us about the Republican Party today, because it's so obvious. I mean, literally, I don't know that you could come up with another example of a more corrupt politician than Ken Paxton, with the possible exception of Donald Trump, which is the point, right? That in Donald Trump's party, you're going to accept any any corruption, indictment, impeachment, adultery. It just doesn't matter. So they come out of there with the weaker of the two candidates. John Cornyn is just blown out of that race. This is the guy's been around Republican politics forever. He was just annihilated in that race. But the first thing they come out with is an attack on Tallarico, basically saying what? He's transsexual, transgender. He's light in the loafers, right? He's low T. The
Low T,
teas.
yeah.
They keep going, and he's a vegan. And part of me is going, okay, Republicans think this is the kill shot in Texas. They think absolutely this will work. On the other hand, it's like, this is the best you got? Really? Serious? I mean,
Yeah.
I understand you want to talk about testosterone rather than, I don't know, endless wars, high gas prices, inflation, corruption, all these other things. But there's another like snapshot of where our politics has gone in
Yeah.
2026.
Well, they call him Tofu Talarico. I'm looking at Nick Cottagio's piece here. Tofu Talarico, Six Gender Jimmy, James Talafrico, Low T Talarico. And then they were wondering why we haven't seen his girlfriend, who has appeared in photos.
But is a vegan.
Is she? Is she a vegan? She looks pretty attractive, like a Latina. And I, the thing is, I guess the goal is we can't, if you're a Republican in Texas, you're thinking we can't make Ken Paxton an attractive candidate. So we have to destroy Talarico and just make him like, he's not like you. He's a weirdo. He's Talafrico. He's out of touch. Because then if they're both like weird, then we just go with the Republican because that's what we are.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. But on the other hand, if you're Talarico and you're a smart candidate, what do? You just hang around with your girlfriend and eat hamburgers a lot. Right?
I mean,
It's like if you're building your campaign on that you're a tofu eating vegan, literally all he has to do is eat a brat. I mean, he just has to eat a brat, have hamburgers every day for the rest of the campaign, and hold hands with his girlfriend. I mean,
he's the one candidate who could benefit from a good sex scandal at this point, But no, I think, what during the speech, you could be eating all sorts of, bacon and stuff.
And they're going to go after, I mean, he's a seminarian, so he has a very progressive view of Christianity. And, they're going to go after him as being, perhaps heterodox. Some of the things that he said. I mean, they're trying to make a thing about that. He said that God is not binary. And by the way, he has walked back some of the stuff he said about gender. He actually is now saying there are two sexes, men and women, and a small number of people with genetic abnormalities. Not a bad answer. But when you say God is not binary, and they're freaking out about this. And look, I don't want to get into a deep theological debate, but do we honestly think that God the Father is? I mean, it's that you can only.
Hey, CM. I'm sorry, Khan. By my estimation, it went fine. Apparently, CM doesn't agree. But he and I often disagree about the fabric, the nature of reality. It was a fun time by me, but he tends to have boutique viewpoints, and what he doesn't understand is that after like a 12-hour stream, there's nothing wrong with a little fuckery. That's why we have weekend shows, and it even happens during the week. But CM seems to think he is a serious intellect, and that his topics are rigorous enough that people have to treat him as some sort of respectable figure. And I'm all for human dignity, but dude, you're not a motherfucking Yale professor of religion. You're just a Cali Black, and there's nothing wrong with that, but don't act like you're more than you are. Hey, what's up, Mariah?
See him as male. I mean, you come from a different tradition, but is that really that offensive to say that basically God is both male and female, that he is, or female is really the lesser of the creatures of creation? What?
I do think culturally it could be, it could hurt him because it takes explaining. It's a nuanced answer, and if you're explaining, you're losing. That's the slogan. So, but look, this goes back. But this goes back to my larger point. It's like, if you're super horny and having a lot of women, then you're bad. But if you're also celibate and you don't have a girlfriend, you're a weirdo too. You know what I'm saying? Like they're damn like Republicans are gonna Plattner may have invited a lot of this, obviously, but like it's not they were gonna find something. They're gonna go after you anyway. So you
Yeah,
might as well.
no, no, I still think that you'd rather have somebody where the attacks are going to be there, but they have to be, revealed to be lame. And I think in the end, probably, as I said, I don't think these sex messages are going to sink Plattner, mainly because his wife has been very, very forceful about it.
Yeah.
And generally, my experience has been when someone says this is private and I've worked through it, I'm sorry about it, I've had difficult times that have come through it. People are actually very, very tolerant. It's the cumulative weight of it.
Well,
But
the woman who released this information
yeah,
used to work for Plattner. So, I mean, this is not going to matter to the average person, but I could just tell you, like, in the political business, if you work for a candidate, you know, the candidate has to give his team negative information about himself. And it's sort of like you would tell your lawyer, yeah, I really did it. And your lawyer's still going to defend you. Right. And so I think there is sort of an implicit violation of trust that's taking place. Not that the public's going to care
more
about
than
that,
implicit. Yeah.
but
No,
this is not
she's
cool.
done in Democratic politics. No, but that's the sort of the insider, bit about all of this. And the thing about it is that it's very, very clear that Graham Plattner had moments where he was deeply unrestrained relatively recently. And what he said about his fellow veterans, what he said about, I don't even want to go into all of it. Janet Mills, before she dropped out of the race, actually ran an ad talking about his attitude toward, women who had been raped. And you would have thought that might have gotten her some traction, but it didn't. So the thing is, about in Maine, by now, I think pretty much most voters kind of have an idea about it. So
He went up
it
in the
could have,
polls after the first scandals came out. But let me ask you
well,
this,
and he might after this, believe it or not, he might after this as kind of a sympathy backlash, like, oh man, they're going after his marriage, and his wife seems sweet, and she's saying they worked through this. So don't be surprised.
Let me ask you this question, because this is something I actually wonder about. Right now, it seems like there's kind of two types of candidates, right? There's the candidate who, like Pete Buttigieg, right? He's always known he wanted to run for president someday. Went to Ivy League school, probably worked at McKinsey as a consultant. Well, like, I can't go out drinking tonight because someday I'm going to run for president, right? Those people are a little bit weird because they're very driven, they're very disciplined, they have a meaning and a purpose that they've known from a young age, and they may not resonate with normal average people. And then you've got people like Plattner who are like, served in the combat unit in the Marines, very complicated, dead and said a lot of effed up bad stuff, but seems to be to a lot of just average rank and file Americans. And let's be honest, Charlie, a society that has undergone 50 to 60 years of cultural degradation. Let's go through Bill Clinton. Let's go through Donald Trump. Let's go through whatever, the 60s. Have we arrived now at a point where, like, the Democrats kind of have two versions of candidates: the squeaky clean version that maybe doesn't resonate, and then the other Plattner version. And now it's like, pick your poison.
Well, we're going to learn a lot over the next couple of years. That is an interesting theory here, because that whole model of the squeaky clean candidate, yeah, maybe that just doesn't count anymore. In the era of Trump, in the era of all of this stuff, it just doesn't count whether you were squeaky clean. It's just whether or not you can make that connection. I think the Democrats also have the problem of they have the whiteboard candidates, the ones who have, here is my 10-point plan on the whiteboard that I'm going to show you, that inflation is up or it is down. No, I think you do need a more visceral connection. I don't want to use the word authentic, but I think that's where a guy like Plattner has broken through. But I guess, Democrats have been burned by falling in love with these novelty candidates before. Can you remember a guy named John Fetterman? Well, people were like all jazzed about John Fetterman. How did the John Fetterman thing work out?
Well, I think that's the one thing is Plattner like a loose cannon that could, you win the election, but you lose, you lose the war.
See, I actually have sympathy for what he went through. I mean, he clearly has been struggling with PTSD, and I think that people need to react with real sympathy to all of that. But this is not in the distant past. I mean, I wonder whether he's still working through some of that stuff. So when you ask that question, you know, if we're talking about something that happened 20 years ago, fine, but we're not. And so I do think that there ought to be at least some discussion before it gets locked in. And for people who say, "Yo, no, shut up about Graham Plattner because it's more important to beat Susan Collins." Well, I understand the logic of that, but would you rather have the conversation now or when Republicans drop $100 million of Oppo research on him in October? So that's why you talk about this now.
Yeah. Well, let me go back to Tallarico for a second, because there's the other issue, and I think this speaks to the Plattner and Tallarico, or they kind of, the two stories, mix a little bit. Going back to the masculinity thing, right? So the Republicans are obviously sort of talking about like what type of is a real man, like somehow that Paxton's a real regular guy, like a real man, and Tallarico isn't. And I have to say, I think Tallarico has been very good at being on top of these things, getting out there. He's not hiding from this. And he had some good lines. Like here's one that's not like a gotcha line, but it really is touching. He said, in a time when there's so much debate about what it means to be a man, my dad showed me every Saturday morning. He would mow our lawn, and then without telling anyone, without asking him, he would go next door and mow our neighbor's lawn. Tallarico told a crowd this week. Nowadays, our culture tells young men that greatness is tearing other people down, trolling and owning and dominating. But my dad showed me what real greatness looks like. Charlie Sykes. That could have been a conservative speech 10 years ago. That could have been Marco Rubio, George W. Bush. That could have been at a Promise Keepers meeting, That's conservative, in my opinion. It's about real masculinity is not about raping and pillaging and dominating. It's about servant leadership and teaching by example. And it saddens me that we now live in a world where that model is considered effete and effeminate.
Well, I agree with you. And I thought that was a good answer. And I think that it's good that we actually have a debate about what it means to be a man. Don't walk away from it. Don't just simply, go out wearing denims, shooting guns or something like that. Say, okay, what does it mean to be a man? And that emphasis on doing for others, caring for others, making sacrifices, leading by example. Again, 20 years ago, this wouldn't have been controversial whatsoever. But the fact that he's leaning into it and saying, okay, I understand you want to make this about manhood. Let's talk about who is the real man. And I think this is whether it works or not. And I don't know, whether it works. I mean, obviously, the Republicans have built an entire cult around, manhood, and Donald Trump is the uber man. But to challenge that and say, is that what we want to tell young men? Raising young men these days is complicated enough without having these role models, the people who get away, the worst people get away with everything. Is that how you want your sons to grow up? Is that the kind of person you want in your life? So I'm glad that James Tallarico is leaning into this. What does it mean to be a man? Because I think we should have a great conversation in the country about that right now. And whether or not he wins that Senate election, I think it's front and center now.
But we have created a world where manliness and masculinity today, is being loud, obnoxious, vulgar.
Actually, Con, that reminds me, I've got a couple Harvey Mansfield vids. We definitely won't get to them today. But oddly enough, he is probably, and he's an academic. But oddly enough, I think he probably has the best kind of old-fashioned, Old Spice. You remember those Old Spice commercials? He's got that Old Spice definition of manliness. And quite frankly, I think it's pretty cool. I would prefer hearing him talk about it than I ever would someone like a fucking Donald Trump. Donald Trump's never mowed a lawn in his life. Anyway, let's oh, by the way, I didn't mention this. There will be news articles after this, and I might actually end this early because we kind of get the gist. Still have about what 22 minutes left of this, and I don't know that we really need to go much farther. Um, there are a couple videos after this. Let's see here. Hold on one sec. Give me one sec. I'm gonna do this tomorrow. And then doing a little bit of housekeeping back here, something I forgot to do earlier. And I better do it now because I'll forget if I don't. So there's that. We're going to talk a little bit about conservative and racists. And Kimberly Crenshaw, I got another video that I actually think is necessary to watch where she's talking about CRT and intersectionality. And she's simply right. And I think history is going to prove her to be bigger and more correct about American culture than conservatives tend to be. She will be remembered when Christopher Rufo is not. And then we also got a video by Tamika Michelle, who we haven't watched in a bit, but she is relevant. Don't know if I'm going to make it through her sanctimoniousness, but we'll attempt. So we'll watch a little bit more of this, and then we'll move on. Maybe another couple minutes to see if it gets interesting. Your Generation Jones. No idea what the fuck Generation Jones is. Is that the ones who were drug addicts? You're jonesing, Generation Jonesing.
I say violent, promiscuous,
Right.
being a dick, being a jerk, being a braggart. And then those are the rules. Like, I didn't write those rules, but if those are the rules, then I guess Paxton and Plattner are the model. And so is Donald Trump. And if that's what the public wants.
Yeah, I don't think that's what the public does want. I think that's that disconnect. Well, okay, I hope not too. But this is a disconnect that you and I have talked about before. Is that people who are the people who run the Boy Scouts, people who, and I'm just thinking about people, the soccer coaches. You go out into the community and you talk to people about their values and who they respect and who they don't respect, and people are still quite reasonable and they have standards and they have values. For some reason, there's a disconnect between those values and then their politics. That we have the lowest standard in our society for the highest offices. So I know really good, honorable people who would never deal with somebody with the character of Donald Trump or Ken Paxton, would not want them around their kids, would not hire them, would not associate with them, go to church every Sunday, and yet they'll vote for them because there's that disconnect. When we really confront it and say, okay, what does it mean to be a good man? What does a leader? What does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to be, a father? I don't think that people are going, I want to be more like Donald Trump. I want to be more like Ken Pax. So but and maybe we're sleepwalking into that cultural degradation. And maybe you have to go through that to go, okay, this is why it's important to emphasize those other values. Just like maybe Donald Trump's shittification of the 250th anniversary, birthday party of America, will get people to say, okay, let's talk about, what America really was about. What were those founding values? Is it about the UFC cage fight? or is it about something else? Maybe there's a possibility of renewal. Feeling naive just saying it, but maybe.
Mm. Well, also down in Texas, Paxton's vanquished opponent, Senator John Cornyn, put out on social media what he called an old but apt fable about the scorpion and the frog. You know, midway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog. I guess I missed some of the story, but you know the story. Donald Trump tells us a lot, right?
Well, he has a snake story. He has
Oh, is
the,
it
you
the
know,
snake? It's kind of the
right.
same story, though, isn't it?
It is. I mean,
It
this
it
is one of
ends
my.
with you knew who I was. This is my character. You knew what this was. I'm just doing what
Right.
a snake does. Or
I am sorry, but I couldn't help myself. It is my character. Why did they? And because the frog is thinking, you know, you promised that you weren't going to do this. I did everything to help you. You know, midway across the river, the scorpion
right.
stings the frog anyway, dooming them both. They're both going to die. The dying frog asked the scorpion why it stung him despite knowing the consequence. To which the scorpion replies, "I'm sorry, but I couldn't help myself. It's my character." John Cornyn posts this on X last week. Okay, an old but apt fable. And you know, I found it rather poignant because John Cornyn gets it now. Too late, but he gets it. Who's the scorpion? Who's the frog? He's the frog. Donald Trump is the scorpion. And the fact that he would post that without any commentary tells me that he understands what just happened to him. But he, you know, my guess is that this is as far as he's going to go in saying it. But you can imagine he's sitting there going, "Should I press send?" And he's, you know, going to, you know, press send. Let that effer know what he did. You
But
know,
it
I
is
don't.
Yeah, like any MAGA people are either going to understand enough to care or just understand and not care. Too late, Cornyn. You rode the back of the scorpion, or I'm sorry, you let the scorpion ride your back and you're stung. Who, unfortunately, it doesn't really matter. But I guess you did what you did. So let's move on, unless people want to watch the rest of this, which I'm willing to do. So Iran stops negotiations with the U.S., vows to completely block Strait of Hormuz, according to its state media, I guess. Yeah, another fail, another Donald Trump fail. Dude, they did like a 2-hour meeting in the Situation Room, and Donald Trump is weighing the options. I'm going to hear everything and approve or disapprove. And Iran's like, fuck it. Iranian negotiators will stop exchanging messages with the U.S. through intermediaries in retaliation for ongoing ceasefire violations. Iran's state-affiliated news outlet Tasnim said. Tehran will also move to fully block the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices leapt more than 7% following Tasnim's report. Dude, Donald Trump does not have this bull by the horns. He is a failure at negotiations. Dude, I told y'all so. Let's watch this, though. This might be interesting.
Indeed, I think that one of the main question marks at the moment is how long this is going to last. But I think more important is how we end this situation. Are we going into a comprehensive deal where we go back to the pre-war scenario where traffic in the Strait of Hormuz fully reopens, or we are leaving the situation in a narrow deal where questions are unanswered, where the Strait of Hormuz, where Iran retains some leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. So I think that is the main question here, and we are seeing supply reacting to high oil prices. We are more optimistic on U.S. shale production growth, for example, for this year and next year, and we're also more optimistic on other shale producers such as Argentina, Venezuela, probably. So we.
By the way, what happened to that energy independence bullshit? I thought we were energy independent. Why do we care if oil goes up to 180 bucks? Because we're not oil independent or energy independent. That's why. Dude, y'all bought that bullshit hook, line, and sinker, MAGA voters. I told you so.
We are going to see some significant impacts on the supply side in the coming months as well.
When it comes to the response from governments and what this means in terms of energy security, it's something you're looking at. You say the biggest story is that energy security is back. And that is fascinating because we were having a conversation earlier about major oil companies, energy companies here in the UK pulling back from the renewable story. How do you think governments are going to ultimately respond around energy security? And do you see a point where renewables have to be part of the answer?
I think that's a great question. For us,
I love her accent.
This energy crisis, that energy security becomes a priority for governments. But let's not forget that energy security means very different things for different types of countries. So if I think of a country that is resource capable, such as the UK, what we think would happen is that those countries will try to incentivize domestic fossil fuel production as an optionality hedge, if you want. But you also have some other countries that don't have the resource capability. We're thinking about Spain, France, for example, where the only option to increase security is through a faster deployment of renewables. And then you have the net exporters of fossil fuels, Saudi Arabia, Russia. For those countries, energy security actually means trying to secure security of demand, that there is a market for those for those barrels flowing in the future. So it really depends on how we look like. And I think that the main takeaway here is that the speed of the energy transition, I think, is going to get a little bit messier as a consequence of the war. I don't think it's going to accelerate. Actually, what we're likely to see is that we're going to see different speed of acceleration in the energy transition, depending on the endowment of the different countries.
George, we're looking at the oil price next to you now, $94 a barrel for the August contract for Brent crude, and $90 for the July contract for US crude. Are those prices realistic in terms of taking into account the factors as they stand on the ground now? And in all honesty, can we guarantee that there would actually be that physical supply available to meet those contracts?
Again, it very much depends on the duration of the contract. We've run some very interesting scenarios, and let's assume that there is no deal and fighting restarts between US and Iran, and we're seeing a scenario of $180 per barrel by August, and that will mean a severe global economic recession, particularly in Europe, particularly in emerging Asia. So that's the extreme scenario. We also have the other scenario where there is a comprehensive deal tomorrow, where suddenly the US and Iran agree on everything, including the nuclear question, including the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. In that world, prices will rapidly come down to around $70 per barrel by the end of the year. So I think it very much depends on what will happen in the next few hours and the next few days. But I do feel that when we look at oil prices, $94 per barrel just a couple of weeks ago, close to 110, I think that the market is pricing in some sort of imminent deal, even if it's a narrow deal coming next, around the corner. But that is a little bit problematic because with so much uncertainty and the range of uncertainty is so huge that we could see an escalation coming forward, and we're likely to see prices, as I said, climbing to $180 per barrel in that worst case scenario.
Okay. We're starting a new month. Let's take the optimistic view and assume that base case is proved to be correct, that some deal is done, there's a cessation of hostilities. What sort of timescales would be needed for the industry to have confidence in resuming production and shipping, for shipping companies to send their tankers back to the region, for producers to fire up the plants again, for insurers to feel that the risk has abated enough, without there potentially being a collapse of a deal and, the ships get halfway there and then have to turn around at great cost, having picked up nothing and made no money?
What we're penciling in is that if there's a deal signed, the first 4 weeks, not much will happen in terms of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And then very gradually, very, very gradually, traffic will start picking up. But we're likely to see an acceleration 2 to 3 months, actually towards 3 months after a peace deal is signed. I think ship owners and operators are going to be extremely cautious on how fast they go back to the Strait of Hormuz. So very, very slow start. And just after a few months, 2-3 months, then traffic will start ramping up because of that lack of confidence. And we've seen in many different conflicts around the world that ceasefires and peace agreements could be quite shaky. So I'm assuming, and that's our base case, that ship owners are going to be extremely cautious.
So even if a deal were done today or tomorrow, for a month after that, we'd see no improvement to the energy supply situation. What's the circumstance then around how much the world can absorb that, given the drawdown we've seen, the record drawdown in stockpiles? How much is there left that could cushion that blow for a further month into the peak summer holiday season in the Northern Hemisphere?
That's the key point, that we are in peak season, summer driving season. So if a deal is signed today, prices will still climbing towards the end of the month, towards $120 per barrel, because of that lack of confidence, because the fact that ship owners are not going to risk themselves going into the Strait of Hormuz. So I think we're likely to see, even if a deal is signed today, still upside price pressure in the coming days and in coming weeks. $120 per barrel is not off the table right now, even if a deal is signed today.
Yep. All right. Well,
look, I think overall through the sector.
Let's talk about some more failure. So, Trump administration live updates. President said to be backing off plans for $1.8 billion fund after backlash. Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is what you get when you have a CEO in chief. I guess he said, hey, I'm going to propose it. Dude, this is just so sad. It's like he didn't, or whoever advised him, they thought that this would fly without any sort of backlash. God damn, dude. So they've shit canned the idea. And let's talk about some more failure. So Trump betrayed farmers. Now real signs of anger show. Oh, really? Just now? So we got to hear this.
Wallet feeling short as chairman of Advancing American Freedom.
Oh, by the way, I've canceled my subscription to the Washington Post. I think I mentioned it. I'm tired of these damn commercials. There should be none. And the Washington Post is like 30 some bucks a month. I'm like, nope, I'm not paying all this money. I think it's like 34 bucks every 30 days. I'm not doing this. I'll substitute it with the Chicago Sun Times, more than likely, because I need a Midwest newspaper anyway.
New York real estate developer Donald Trump has openly courted the farm vote every time he's run for president. Green hats emblazoned with "Make Our Farmers Great Again" were commonplace at Trump rallies during all three of his national campaigns. In the 2024 election, American farmers again supported him, but things are different now. President Trump's trade policies have punched farmers in the mouth, and this time there's no global pandemic to blame. Last year, America's crop farmers lost $34.6 billion, and farm bankruptcies surged to numbers not seen since 2020, according to the American Farm Bureau Federation. This year, 70% of farmers surveyed claim they cannot afford all the fertilizers they need. Fuel costs continue to rise as the Iran conflict remains unresolved and the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. 94% of farmers reported that their financial situation has worsened or remained the same since last year. 15,000 farms closed in 2025 alone. The New York Times chronicles the closing of American family farms. Bankruptcies were up 55% in 2024. 46% in 2025, and 70% by May of this year. Republicans who continue to ignore this reality do so at their peril. The president's global trade war resulted in China slashing its imports of American crops and livestock by 63%.
Yeah. Now, someone in this very meager audience or someone on a replay, tell me how this MAGA movement is populist if the farmers are not doing well, or it sounds like they're not even treading water. How is this a populist movement? It's not. It is an oligarchy. So once again, MAGA blacks, black conservatives, just MAGA in general, all you freaks like Ryan Bardwell, who still call themselves Latino for Trump. And I notice he's backed away from that a bit, to his credit. And Bardwell, who fucking has like a Trump flag in his little avatar. Dude, I told you so. And it's so funny because Bardwell wants to talk about how rich he is and how his money talks. Dude, if you're rich, of course you can afford to like Trump, but us poor people, we can't so much. Me and CM and CT, like us normal black men who are barely holding on. Well, Massa Bardwell, you can afford to like Trump.
Rumored Chinese concessions from the Trump administration would do little to help farmers dig out of that deep of a hole. Input costs have increased as well. Prices for some fertilizers are up 47% year over year. Fuel, which was relatively affordable until the Iran conflict, is now much more expensive. America's farmers are caught between a trade war with China and a burning conflict with Iran. Trade wars, waged with little to no coherent strategy, have left the largest buyers of American produce, Mexico, Canada, and China, looking elsewhere. From the end of May through November last year, China didn't purchase a single American soybean, choosing to do business with Brazil instead.
Oh my God, I knew they'd switched to Brazil. So China bought no soybeans? Dude, this is exactly what I mean by China can just fucking look Donald Trump in the eye and go, fuck you. You're not the only soybean on the market. Dude, Donald Trump is fucking up these farmers, the economy, and dude, all the MAGA blacks. And MAGA blacks, I blame more so than even like the white women MAGA voters or the white men MAGA voters or the Hispanics who voted for him. I will vote for Donald Trump. Dude, y'all need to you need to retune them guitars. Your mariachi bands better fucking be learning a new tune. And the MAGA blacks, ooh, man, y'all fucked up big time. You're gonna be paying more in those food deserts you live in, MAGA blacks.
Meanwhile, American agricultural exports to Canada decreased by more than $1 billion, in part because of Canadian boycotts of American products. States whose economies rely on agriculture are struggling, and it's showing up in the polls. In Ohio, J.D. Vance's old Senate seat and the governor's mansion are considered toss-ups. Polls for the Senate race in North Carolina, another agriculture-heavy state, show Democratic former Governor Roy Cooper with a healthy lead over former Republican National Committee Chairman Michael Whatley. Iowa, another state synonymous with agriculture, is currently rated as likely Republican for its open Senate seat, but polls continue to show a tight race and the Democrat winning the governor's race. The Senate GOP's top super PAC is spending $79 million in Ohio, $71 million in North Carolina, and $29 million in Iowa. These investments mean that Republican political strategists acknowledge the need to bolster these candidates and that this money can't be spent on other competitive races. The White House is paying attention, distributing $12 billion last December in one-time payments to farmers who suffered unfair market disruptions. Whether the White House will move beyond bailouts and toward substantial policy shifts to help American farmers remains unlikely, especially since Trump signaled his opposition to widely popular proposals that would ban the Chinese Communist Party from buying American farmland and land near military bases. Political coalitions are not set in stone. They must be won in every cycle. When politicians break their promises or fail to deliver, they will face retribution at the ballot box. American voters.
Hey, Khan, to your point, and I'm no paragon of anything much other than trolling. I'd like to think I'm a paragon of trolling. I'm a cranky old man who likes to troll young people on YouTube. Probably the only thing I'm good at doing. Probably the only thing I'm actually good at doing, at least in my own, mind. However, when I say, and people like CM and all these people keep misquoting what I said, I understand, quote, white culture better than a Ryan Bardwell or better than a Be Brave, because motherfucker, I'm better educated. So I'm more Western. Shit, I'm more Western than a Be Brave. So this bullshit Brian Nichols about blacks in the West are incompatible. Dude, Cornel West, and people don't really know this, Cornel West, and I can't remember the name of the book. I actually own it, but haven't gotten around to reading it. Cornel West wrote a seminal philosophy text that, like, in the philosophy world, Cornel West, people don't know he was actually a fucking really serious philosopher. He wrote like a seminal text. I think it was back in the 90s. And he's black. See, when you read books and you keep up with this sort of stuff, you can pull out facts like that, Brian Nichols. I'm more Western than most of the white people you might run into. I'm definitely know more about Western culture than Donald Trump does. So keep saying blacks don't belong in the West, or what did you say? Let's put that up here. Blacks are not compatible with the West. Dude, we are the West. The rap music that I don't think whites are compatible with with the West. Come on, Brian. I hope you were kidding with that that comment. So let's talk more about MAGA failure and what Charlie Sykes called the enshittification of America. Diplomacy in decline. 2,000 U.S. diplomats have been laid off or forced to retire, taking with them decades of institutional knowledge, crisis response experience, and highly specialized language skills. Let's listen to this.
Diplomacy in Decline. This article is written by Abigail Williams and is read by an automated voice. There may be mispronunciations. Kelly Adams Smith dedicated her life to the U.S. Foreign Service, serving her country for almost 3 decades as a diplomat. I came in with my husband. We were a tandem couple. We met in graduate school, took the exams together, entered together, and served together for 28 years, Adams Smith said. We also left the Foreign Service on the same day. She was nominated as ambassador to Moldova in 2024, a milestone in her career, where she expected to draw on the diplomatic experience she had gained across Europe, along with her training in economics and fluency in multiple languages, including Russian. But in February 2025, Adam Smith was one of dozens of senior career Foreign Service officers whose nominations were pulled down by the Trump administration. Offered little to no other prospective jobs to fit her skills, she is part of a wave of high-level retirements from the State Department in recent months as experienced Foreign Service officers struggle to find available positions in a system that, like the military, you must move up or be forced out. My job and the people who left with me, they had more runway. They had expected to serve in those mentoring and leadership roles. And so it was devastating, Adam Smith said. But I also felt that there was not a place for me in the department anymore, and that I really didn't have a choice. The State Department declined to provide exact numbers. According to the American Foreign Service Association, around 2,000 U.S. diplomats have left the Foreign Service over the last year, either through layoffs or forced retirements, taking with them decades of institutional knowledge, experience in crisis response, and highly specialized language skills paid for by the U.S. government. Their departure from a workforce that was estimated to be more than 13,000 in 2024 leaves the U.S. at a critical disadvantage, current and former State Department officials say, at a time when the nation is facing an escalating number of foreign policy crises. Elizabeth Horst, who served her country across Republican and Democratic administrations in Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and countries in Europe, said that when good leaders and experts leave, America is diminished. So, when there's a crisis, we just don't have the infrastructure we used to have to make sure that Americans overseas stay safe, and that, frankly, our business interests are protected, Horst said. It's that day-to-day commerce that lots of American jobs rely on, and people don't feel that immediately. But it is going to have a long-term impact. The leadership vacuum is large. The ambassadorship in Moldova is still vacant, along with more than half of ambassadorships around the globe, including in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where a worsening Ebola outbreak began.
Holy cow.
There's no ambassador to Ukraine, and seasoned diplomat Julie Davis, who has been leading the embassy in Kyiv, while
You know, this is a long article, but I don't know. I guess we'll listen to it a little bit more. I didn't realize that the State Department had been decimated like this. What the fuck are these people doing? Wow.
while simultaneously serving as ambassador to Cyprus, is stepping down next month to join others in retirement. And the administration is increasingly overlooking its own expertise. Senior-level Foreign Service officers have been largely absent from high-level negotiations in Russia and the Middle East, as Trump aides struggle with allies and adversaries. NBC News spoke with more than a dozen current and former senior career Foreign Service officers who detailed the decline from the inside. The officers who spoke on condition of anonymity did so over fear of reprisal. State Department spokesman Tommy P. Gott said the department relies on professionalism, experience, and service of both Foreign Service officers and civil service employees to advance American interests around the world. Career personnel serve administrations of both parties and implement the foreign policy of the elected government. The department remains confident in the strength, capability, and professionalism of its workforce to carry out its mission at home and abroad, he said. Forced out. The Trump administration began withdrawing dozens of ambassadorial nominations for career senior Foreign Service members in the first months in office. But by December, it was recalling nearly 30 career ambassadors already in their posts. U.S. diplomats who had worked across administrations were told they were welcome to apply for other jobs, but the options available to them were limited. Returning ambassadors have 90 days to find another assignment, or they are forced to retire under the Foreign Service Act of 1980. Several current and former senior State Department officials described political vetting that went broader and deeper than it had ever been, with scrutiny of social media and political donations, extending beyond the applying officer to their family members. The message to those people was very clear. There's no place for you, one former career senior State Department official said. The State Department acknowledged the increase in retirements, but said the figures were affected by the inclusion of officers from the U.S. Agency for International Development, which had worked hand in glove on many international issues but was shuttered last year. The American Foreign Service Association said the tally didn't include the laid-off USAID officers, who alone were over 2,000. In a dramatic decline from even Trump's first term, when senior Foreign Service officers made up more than half of ambassadorial nominations, less than 8% of the administration's nominees for ambassador-level positions have been career diplomats. The administration was very clear when they came in that they viewed the Foreign Service as a barrier, not a tool. The former official said. They saw a very entrenched hierarchical institution and said this group of people is not going to fulfill our needs going forward. Pigot said the president had the right to determine who represents American interests globally. The transition away from Biden-era ambassadors is not news, nor should it be surprising. Absence of U.S. leadership abroad. The decision to keep senior Foreign Service officers out of top leadership positions has led to nearly 100 embassies, more than half the worldwide total, operating without Senate-confirmed ambassadors.
Yeah, I'm going to stop this here. Just what the fuck are they thinking? So speaking of cabinet-level departments that are decimated because the talent is either forced out or just like, fuck this, I can make more money anyway. Let's talk about Trump administration sees striking as exodus of legal talent. And I've been talking about this for quite some time, how Donald Trump is just taking the Justice Department, that in the State Department, and I guess the Defense Department were like crown jewels. And Treasury too, maybe. Oh, what the fuck? The enshittification of America. Yeah, I'm going to keep using that word because I love it. And it takes the word shit and just makes it seem so cosmopolitan. So let's listen to a little bit of this. Like this picture here, Phil Wisner, the Colorado Attorney General, with some of the 22 lawyers from across the federal government that he has hired since May of last year. Wow. Hey, these are people who take a pay cut to work for the Justice Department. And now, I don't know that they're going to make more money, say at the, in the AG office of Colorado. But like Maureen Comey went to work for a private law firm because, I mean, she has connections and she like successfully prosecuted Epstein and some other high priority, high visibility cases. She's probably making 3 or 4 times. So I don't know this for sure, but I bet she probably went in as a fucking partner.
Trump administration sees striking exodus of legal talent. This article is by Eileen Sullivan and Andrea Fuller and read by an automated voice. President Trump's upheaval of the federal government has led to an exodus of more than 10,000 lawyers since the beginning of 2025, a striking loss of legal talent that has left some agencies pushing to find attorneys to carry out his agenda. Roughly 1 in 5 lawyers who worked in the government at the end of 2024 had left by March of this year, according to a New York Times analysis of federal employment data. Along with the usual retirements and turnover in the federal workforce, the last year saw deep staffing cuts and the resignations of some staff members who objected to Mr. Trump's policies. Their departures show how rapidly the president has eroded the image of the federal government as the gold standard for lawyers seeking public service roles. Instead, many of those looking for such work are flocking to the offices of Democratic state attorneys general and nonprofits that are challenging administration policies in the courts, boosting Mr. Trump's opponents with seasoned lawyers. There's all this awareness that people in the federal government are dissatisfied, are angry, are frustrated, and want no part of it, said Phil Weiser, Colorado's Attorney General, who has hired 22 lawyers from across the federal government in the last year. that's translating directly to people saying, I want to be part of organizations that actually operate with integrity, that people want to be a part of, that people feel good about doing the right thing. Wariness of the Trump administration is also palpable inside law schools, where many aspiring lawyers who would have once jumped at the chance to hold a federal government job are seeking alternative paths, according to faculty members and students.
Yeah, I'll just stop it there. In a way, this is intentional. Republicans have always wanted to, shrink the government, incapacitate the government. Small government means an inept and emasculated government. Can't regulate if there are no lawyers. Dude, the enshittification of America. So this next, let's see here. I need to figure out, give me one sec here. I have not figured out how the controls work on this. So I guess I'm just gonna have to show it. So this is talking about that $1.8 billion slush fund for the January 6th terrorizationists. And this is like some Republican congresswoman on Fox News shitting on Donald Trump. Notice the red hat in the background. I'm going to have to restart it because I can't figure out where the controls are.
I ever support any payouts for anyone who ever assaulted law enforcement.
Let's start at the beginning. Damn it.
Committee last Congress, I can tell you that the issue is very real and it is rampant, but I'm not sure that a $1 billion plus slush fund is the answer. I think if you really want to eliminate the weaponization that takes place within the federal government against American citizens and those that serve, you need to actually address the root cause. This is the problem that we have in Washington. It's the idea of throwing money at a problem and hoping it goes away. I think that money could be better spent in bringing down the cost of everything and making life more affordable for Americans while simultaneously addressing the system that allowed for the weaponization against individuals here in this country. And certainly I will say, as the wife of a first responder, absolutely under no circumstances would I ever support any payouts for anyone who ever assaulted law enforcement.
All right, well,
as someone who served on the weaponization committee last Congress, I can tell you that the issue is very real and it is rampant.
Well, anyway,
but I'm not.
Yeah. Trump lost on this one. It's bad when even women like this woman, I can't remember her name. Let's see. Oops. Let's do that. So she's Kat Kamek. So even his little toadies are not happy with this bullshit. Let's see. Here's some more enshittification. We're going to enshittify the fucking 250th anniversary, apparently. Trump floats replacing 250th anniversary concert with massive MAGA rally after artists pull out. Dude. Dude is struggling.
It's a big deal.
Let's see here. I'm gonna have to figure out how to start this over too, apparently.
And the biggest fight they've ever done by
let's see. Let's pause it. Let's start it over. And let's play it from the beginning.
We celebrate 250th anniversary of our country. And it's our nation's founding. It's a big deal. On June 14th, we're going to have the UFC and the biggest fight they've ever done by far. Then we have Roger Penske is going to have a big championship Indy around the Capitol. That's going to be in August. So we have a lot of really exciting things happening.
So America is celebrating its 250th birthday, and we're doing it in style with major events throughout the country, including a UFC fight, a great American state fair, and even an IndyCar race. This week, Amtrak unveiled the Freedom 250 Acela train. It's wrapped in red, white, and blue. And next Sunday, America gives thanks to God with rededicated 250 at the National Mall.
On May 17th, I invite you to join us on the National Mall for Rededicate 250. Let us gather in unity to give thanks for 2.5 centuries of freedom and to rededicate our future as one nation.
This is how unthinking these people are. I'm sorry. Who celebrates 250 years of freedom? Maybe not the descendants of slaves so much. They're hombre. God damn these people. These people are fucking racist as fuck.
Under God.
Joining us now is Ambassador Monica Crowley, U.S. Chief of Protocol and the Trump Administration Representative to Freedom 250. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
You just told me you're going to kick off this rededication event. It's one of several. And I want you to talk about that. But first, I want to ask you, assuming this position, getting involved with this 250, is there any other president we've ever had that would be putting this much effort into making sure that we appreciate our country and its heritage? And there's any other president that could have made it happen?
Absolutely not. Not like President Trump.
Yeah.
What an absolute gift it is to have President Trump in office now to celebrate America's semi-quincentennial or 250th birthday. And, he jokes about bringing the Olympic Games and the FIFA World Cup in his first term, which is all going to happen now in his second term. And he jokes about 252, but he can't quite take credit for that. But he has promised the American people the most momentous, brilliant, and exciting celebration in our exceptional nation's history. And that is exactly what we're going to deliver.
Ambassador, I want to talk to you about UFC. All right. This is going to be a first-time thing, right? And it's gonna make a lot of waves. Tell me about the preparation for that, and give us some insider information into how this is going to go down.
Yes, well, all of the events surrounding America 250, and you can go to freedom250.org for all of the information about what's happening nationally as well as state by state and in your neck of the woods. The first event, as Joey mentioned, is going to be Rededicate 250. That is the national prayer event on the National Mall next Sunday. I will be kicking that off, to be followed on June 14th, which is Flag Day and also the president's birthday, by this extraordinary UFC 250 fight. They're going to begin building the octagon on the South Lawn, Tommy, in a few short weeks. And we're expecting tens of thousands of people to come out for that 250 fight on the South Lawn. It is going to be extraordinary, once in a lifetime opportunity for everybody to come out and see that fight. And then following July 4th, in August, we are going to have another one-of-a-kind sporting event, which is the IndyCar 250 race around the nation's capital, Constitution Avenue, Independence Avenue. It is going to be blockbuster.
It's so good to see you, first of all.
Too, guys.
You just sort of jumped past July 4th, which is the big one. That is the actual, birthday party. DC puts on a show on the 4th of July. I feel like this one's going to be the show on steroids. What can you tell us?
This is going to be the show of shows because, of course, to Joey's point, we have Donald Trump as president, and he does everything the biggest and the best. And he really promised from the day he became president in the second term that he was going to put on the greatest show to celebrate our exceptional country. So on July 4th, of course, there are going to be celebrations all across the country. But the two big pillars.
Wait, so he's going to do a circus? The biggest show? Wasn't it Barnum and Bailey Circus, biggest show on earth? Yeah, this is what it's working out to be, apparently.
Will be here in New York City, an international naval review of tall ships from 30 plus countries are sending tall ships plus modern naval vessels as well, starting in New York Harbor, going up the Hudson River. And then at night, of course, New York and all cities are going to celebrate. In fact, all cities around the world are going to celebrate. But in our nation's capital, we are going to do the biggest, grandest fireworks display in the history of the world, in addition to nighttime programming with headline performances, and I can't divulge any of those big acts yet, but that is all coming. And of course, it's going to be a salute to America with the president. So many fantastic individuals who helped to make this nation so special.
Monica, I feel like Ambassador, I feel like your job is just the most fun in Washington. There are a lot of fun things going on. I didn't know about the Indy thing around the Capitol. That's awesome. There's a ballroom being built. There's, the fireworks. We're gearing up for the 4th of July. You were talking about things all across the country. What can we expect all across this nation as Americans want to join in on this 250-year celebration?
Well, the president also promised the golden age. So all of the things that we're talking about celebrating America's exceptionalism, our shared patriotism, and really kind of a renewed sense of civic pride. That's what all of these events are all about. And for those in the audience who can remember 1976, the bicentennial, you may not remember the specifics about that day or where President Ford was or what he said to the country, but you do remember how you felt. It was this indelible sense of American patriotism. And that's what we're trying to recreate this year for our 250th. So in addition to the big national events, Molly, there will be state-by-state events, and every city is going to have their own celebration. So again, freedom250.org is the central place to find out all of the details.
Ambassador Monica Crowley, thank you so much for joining us. You said you were bragging about these 250 years to the king last week, so just keep doing what you're doing. We appreciate it.
To the king.
Well, I'm hustling all world leaders to come and help.
Oh, she maybe they mean England or something. I thought maybe they meant the King of America. So let's hear this very humorous counterpoint. We're not going to hear the whole thing, but this is from the Midas Touch folks, which I rarely listen to, but this was just compelling.
Donald Trump's so-called UFC event at the White House on June 14th is becoming an utter disaster. You have top UFC fighters calling out the event. You have Joe Rogan, who hosts UFC events, calling out the event. Also, Donald Trump promised there would be 100,000 fans in attendance at this massive stadium they were going to build. Instead, they're building this like small, grotesque structure in the White House where they're now recruiting 4,000 service members to become spectators since nobody actually wants to be there. So they want to use our service members as props, but they only want service members who the Trump regime considers to not be, and this is a direct quote from the Trump regime, to not be fatties. And so they're making specific height and weight requirements if you want to be a spectator and you're part of the armed services. And if you are, quote, a fatty, the White House says you're not allowed to show up. And then they're also making the service members pay their own way to actually attend, which a lot of service members aren't able to do. This whole thing is becoming a massive mess. The Washington Post did a story on it, to which the White House immediately responded. We're like, fake news, fake news. I mean, the Washington Post story is as follows: Pentagon recruiting troops to watch White House UFC fights, memo shows. Internal messages reviewed by the Washington Post stipulate that the military personnel must pay their own way and meet strict physical requirements to be eligible. Quote, you must meet the current waist to height ratio and current physical fitness standard. No fatties allowed is what they're saying. Also, this Trump thing is becoming an utter disaster, where we're now also learning that Donald Trump is investing in the parent company of UFC as part of those 3,800 trades that he does every quarter now. Let's just break down some of the events. Let's just go receipt by receipt right now. First, let me show you Donald Trump from a few months back when he talked about this event, where he said 100,000 people were going to be in attendance. Here's what he had to say a few months ago when he said it was going to be 100,000 people. Play this clip.
Wonderful things. UFC is coming, as you know, in front of the White House with a building, literally a stadium. We're going to have over 100,000 people. And this is going to have a lot of people. I won't even say how many people, because I think it can set a record for racing. It's going to be very, very important. We're celebrating greatness with America.
Well, this is the stadium that they've been building. It looks absolutely horrible. As former Secretary of State.
Okay. Hey, Con. I'm kind of proud of that one. even though it's kind of dry, it's not that funny. But when you think about it, the military-industrial complex, but Zionist. I'm kind of proud of that one. It's kind of a, I like it. I might even have to use it as a show title.
Hillary Clinton writes, "This is what Trump's done to the people's house. A third of it is rubble. Another third is a cage match. What a metaphor." And then all the MAGA people were like, libs are so accustomed to destroying buildings and property that they have no idea what a construction site even looks like. I mean, look, this is like just an absolutely grotesque thing right here. Let me show you how this was a scoop that CNN got on service members being invited to the UFC event, that it would be banning, quote, fatties. Here's what CNN reported. Play this clip.
And on this very issue of optics, Brian Todd is live in Washington near that massive UFC cage, which is on the White House front lawn, that's being built for the UFC fight. Happens to be on Trump's birthday, which is Flag Day, on the 250th birthday of America. And Brian, you're getting some breaking details about the event there. What are you learning?
Right, Aaron, a lot of anticipation for this event on June 14th. Right here on the White House South lawn, these grounds behind me, you can see where they're setting up all the stands. That archway, that temporary arch there, is a huge lighting stanchion that's being set up. A lot of anticipation for this event. We're getting new reporting now from our colleagues Zachary Cohen and Josh Campbell that senior Pentagon leaders are making lists of service members who they're going to offer free tickets to this event next month. But according to our sources, the tickets will only be given to service members who meet these new military body composition standards. That's according to sources familiar with the process and military memos that our colleagues Zachary Cohen and Josh Campbell have reviewed. One memo it says that recipients are required to meet new DOW, meaning Department of War standards for waist to height ratio, which is, they say, it should be less than 0.55. Now, broken down, what that means is that for a male service member who's 5'9", the maximum waist size for that person, if they're going to be admitted to this event, would be 37 inches. For a female service member who's 5'4", her maximum waist size should be 35 inches or less if they're going to be admitted to this event. The Cleveland Clinic lists an average male height in the United States of 5'9", average female height of 5'4". Now, according to one defense official, it says this sends a very clear message to any attendees who want to come to this event, who are interested in attending this event, quote, no fatties. Another defense official said senior Pentagon leaders are signaling their preference for military members who will look good on camera. And that person said, again, basically no fat soldiers would be admitted to this event, Aaron. That's controversial, but also, even though they're encouraging the military to recruit junior enlisted people and junior officers to come and encouraging them to recruit people from outside the nation's capital, they are making military members who want to come to this event and get the free tickets, they're making them pay their own way to Washington, D.C. for that. And as we know, prices for travel, airline, train, whatever, they tend to spike this time of the year. So that could be controversial as well. Aaron?
More from CNN right here. Here's what Caitlin Collins had to say. Let's play this clip.
Tonight, we're learning more about who exactly has made the invite list for President Trump's made-for-TV UFC event at the White House next month. The Pentagon is now recruiting uniformed troops to attend, but not all of them qualify. In the words of one defense official summing up the policy to CNN, they said, quote, no fatties. Memos reviewed by CNN show that the tickets will only be given to service members who meet a certain waist-to-height ratio. A source of the Pentagon said that senior leaders, quote, want attendees to look good on camera during the event. And the source added, basically, no fat soldiers.
Now, as I noted, even Joe Rogan is against this. He says, I mean, look, the weather conditions could make it very dangerous for the fighters. You know, Washington, D.C. is a swamp. It's hot. There are bugs. Like, this is not where an event should be. You know, he predicts it's going to be a disaster. Here's what Joe Rogan had to say.
The White House thing is odd. I don't like it. I don't like the idea of fighting outside at all.
Well, there's problems with it.
And then
done it too many times.
June, and it's DC, and we looked it up the last time, like last year, same day, it was 100 degrees.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
yeah.
hot as fuck.
Then you add the lights.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the lights.
You add the lights.
Yeah,
that attracts bugs.
I mean, they were talking about maybe using fans. Is that enough?
No, it's not
You know,
enough.
bug strips everywhere. What are you going to do? Like, how are you going to stop the bugs?
I just don't think that you should compete in a world championship fight in a non-controlled environment.
Yeah.
I think it should be inside an air-conditioned arena. It should be a controlled environment, just like you don't ask someone to do any of that. You wouldn't ask them to play a world championship basketball game outside in the sun.
No.
That would be crazy.
Yeah.
Right? You play in a fucking air-conditioned arena, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I understand.
Yeah, I'm going to stop that here. But, you know, at least Joe Rogan knows something about something. It's crazy. Again, shitification. Donald Trump is literally ruining the United States from the inside out. And Cam, you said something earlier about America being a young country. Nah, I don't think that's a good enough excuse. Unless you will deny American exceptionalism. Your argument is anti-American exceptionalism, and I don't have a problem with anti-American exceptionalism. There are one or two things. I think the American spirit, I think American creativity, very exceptional, but that's about it. We are not exceptional when it comes to leadership, especially lately. And we're not exceptional when it comes to governance. I think we are still trying to figure out, how to achieve a common good, and we may never figure it out. But this American exceptionalism stuff, it's just basically a form of white supremacy, in my opinion. So let us move on. So Newark mayor orders curfew near Delaney Hall as clashes persist. So on Sunday, Newark Mayor Ras Baraka implemented a mandatory nightly curfew around Delaney Hall, effective 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. until further notice, following days of escalating clashes between protesters and law enforcement. So I think this has to do with the ICE facility, and apparently people are dying in these ICE facilities, and they're protesters. So this is the same ICE facility that what's the lady's name? McIver's her last name. I can't remember the first name, but she's gonna wind up in court because the Trump administration has insisted on pressing charges, accusing her of assaulting an ICE agent or something. It's not going to go anywhere, but because they dropped the charges against this mayor, by the way. Originally, he was charged, Ras Baraka, and he wound up having the charges dropped for some reason. And I imagine it'll wind up happening for Representative McIver. Now, let's go ahead and continue on the theme of the enshittification of America that this MAGA movement has forced upon us. We're going to have to clean it up. We're going to have to clean up this MAGA shit pile that Donald Trump is going to leave America after he's gone one way or another. I don't see MAGA continuing after Trump is gone. I just don't see it. So Brian, you better enjoy it while you can, son, because this is MAGA's last hurrah. So by the way, I have posted the link. If anyone wants to come up and rebut, you're more than welcome to do it. So here we go. This is I rarely show Sam Cedar, but this was an actual fairly decent interview. And it has to do with enshittification. It has to do with founding of America. I think it has something to do with this weird form of masculinity that's being imposed on the Defense Department. And yes, it's the Defense Department until Congress approves the name change. So this is called the racist conservative attack on the second founding of America. I think Adam Serwer talks about the military, or maybe mixing it up with another interview. But yeah, the second founding is generally considered post, the Reconstruction, post Civil War, 14th, 15th, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. And the Supreme Court has just been pounding the shit out of the 14th Amendment. And these conservatives actually want to do originalism on the pre-Civil War version of the Constitution. Again, what they did with the Voting Rights Act, it's in shitification.
Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Pleasure to welcome back to the program Adam Serwer, author, staff writer at The Atlantic. Adam, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I have been, on one hand, very surprised at how little attention, relatively speaking, the Calais ruling has gotten and the implications of it. On one hand, surprised. On the other hand, this has been sort of like telegraphed by the Supreme Court for over a decade. Let's go back, though, before we get there. Will you walk us through a little bit the sort of reconstruction roots of what we're seeing today? And you write in your piece about the 15th Amendment and how it's being how the interpretation of the 15th Amendment by the Supreme Court today is completely wrong based upon how it was created.
Well, it's really an inversion of what the amendment was supposed to do. At the time, the South Black people in the South are being terrorized by racist Democrats. Democrats are making some headway arguing against Black suffrage in the North. So the idea is to solve the problem by simply enfranchising everybody everywhere by making sure that you cannot deny the right to vote on the basis of race. Now, the radicals at the time had critiques of the 15th Amendment because they feared it was not broad enough. And they correctly perceived that there were loopholes in the amendment that reactionaries would use to disenfranchise the very people they were trying to protect. And that's unfortunately what happened. So after Reconstruction, the Supreme Court, which is made up of largely Republican appointees, some Union veterans even, basically says as long as, the disenfranchisement devices are not explicitly racial, they're constitutional. So that's how you end up with these sort of superficially race-neutral laws that the purpose of which are to disenfranchise Black people.
By the way, the next video is Kimberly Crenshaw, who we watched a bit yesterday, but this is a different interview. She makes an excellent point about the flaw in race neutral, the whole concept of it. Kimberly Crenshaw, and I said this earlier, she's going to wind up being like, she's going to wind up being a remembered scholar. She gets it right. Both she and Derek Bell get the nature, especially the legal system, but America in general, right with this race neutral nonsense. This race neutral bullshit is just to make little Trent and Becky feel better. Okay. Shit's not race neutral. American culture is fundamentally racist, and band-aiding it with race neutral laws is just fooling little Bart and little Karen. It's just so the truth doesn't hurt their whittle feelings. It's part of that patriotic education bullshit the John Roberts, syndrome that, ooh, we're past race because we had a black president. these white folks are fooling themselves. And not all of them, of course, but the Ryan Bardwells are just they are the problem with America, to be honest. Be Brave, problem with America. Donald Trump, problem with America. And I am glad to never have more than like 30 people in my chat because it's true. I don't know if I know the whole truth, but I know some of it. And I know that the Ryan Bardwells and the anti-black blacks too, the John Galts, the CTs, most of these red pill MAGA black types, they're the problem too.
Grandfather clauses, literacy tests, poll taxes, stuff like that. The explicit purpose is to get around the 15th Amendment prohibition so that you can disenfranchise black people. And now it ends up disenfranchising some poor whites as well. But the purpose is to reestablish white supremacy in a way that will pass legal muster. And the post-Reconstruction court essentially allows this, interpreting the Civil War amendments in as narrow a way as possible.
And this is because we should say the 15th Amendment says it establishes the right to vote can't be denied on account of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude, and then grants Congress power to enforce through legislation. And so, but the explicit idea of the 15th Amendment is to enfranchise.
And by the way, the 15th Amendment, this is where, in my opinion, and I haven't even read the whole opinion, the Calais, the Calais decision, but the argument that black people still have the right to vote, white people who brought the suit in the first place didn't lose their right to vote. Essentially, it comes down to representation. And in my opinion, the Supreme Court they confused voting with representation deliberately. You'll never convince me that a Supreme Court justice can't separate the two. You have a right to vote, but you don't necessarily have a right to representation. Majority rules in that case. This gerrymandering is partisan. You don't have a right to representation, and people don't seem to understand that. You have a right to vote. You have a right to try and be represented. But if you're a Democrat and you vote Democrat, but you live, in a place where, the Republican won, they're going to be more represented than you are, at least, kind of at a higher level. But that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, if you go to your Republican representative and you're a Democrat, more than likely, if they're not like a MAGA hack, they'll at least listen to you. And who knows, you might have a good idea. But I think the Supreme Court literally was a racist decision. And they chose between who would actually be represented more. And they went for the white people. And, well, let's say this. They enabled the states to favor white people. The Supreme Court would never dirty its hands, with partisanship, right? In partisanship in the South oftentimes is a proxy for race. It's a one-to-one, not synonymous, but it is a proxy. And these MAGA blacks who keep saying, well, blacks didn't lose the right to vote. Well, neither did whites. But they got favored. Basically, their vote got elevated over the black vote.
As black people, in other words, that it was racial in its intent.
It was racial and partisan, and there were people who objected.
And explain how it was partisan too, because I'm not sure like people are fully aware of like sort of the dynamic. Democrats at that time, of course, more associated with the Confederacy, Republicans more associated with the Union, and they were the party of Lincoln at that time. And you knew that Lincoln was a Republican, right?
To clarify, like there's almost nobody at this time who you would recognize as like, a modern liberal. Right. You'd have to go to someone like Charles Sumner or Thaddeus Stevens to get someone who like even approaches sort of that combination of economic and social liberalism. But so at the time, the Republican Party is the party of the Union, and they realized that, their political project is not viable without black suffrage in the South. And so a lot of guys who are pretty conservative go along with the Civil War amendments, not just abolishing slavery, but the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment, precisely because they understand that the Republican Party, if it's going to have voters in the South at this point, it's going to be black people and like maybe some white people, but mostly black people. And they also understand that, up north, it's not the most popular idea. So the easiest way to ensure that, black suffrage is placed beyond sort of political machination is to amend the Constitution in order to make sure that black people can't be denied the vote on the basis of race. And there are some nativist Republicans at this time who are like, well, you're going to give, Chinese people the right to vote. And the radicals are like, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. It doesn't matter. Everybody, people like Representative John Bingham are saying, we are going to rid the country of the horrid blasphemy that this is a white man's country. And of course, at the time, the Democrats, they're essentially running on white supremacy explicitly. This is a white man's country, let white men rule. And so, the 15th Amendment is adopted at a time of vicious, racially motivated partisan disenfranchisement. Black people in the South are dealing with terrorism and violence from the Ku Klux Klan. They're dealing with a Democratic Party that is explicitly stating its mission is to reassert white supremacy. And so if the 15th Amendment didn't bar partisan motivated racist disenfranchisement, it wouldn't have done anything at all. So it doesn't make any sense to say, well, you can't disentangle race and party, and therefore, we just sort of have to let these racist restrictions go through. The Republican Party, the cause of the 15th Amendment was a partisan cause. It was an ideological cause. It was a principled cause. There were these, some of these guys in the, the radicals like Charles Sumner and Thaddeus Stevens, Frederick Douglass, these people obviously are expressing moral views about race that we would recognize as very enlightened. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they also understood that the Republican Party was the only vehicle for doing this because the Democratic Party at the time was an explicitly white supremacist organization. The idea is just to say, whether you're in the Republican Party, whether you're the Republican Party in the 21st century or the Democratic Party in the 19th century, the Constitution bars, writing black people out of the Constitution so that you don't have to appeal to them at all.
It feels like the justification in the minds of, like, if you could just go back to what Scalia wrote in Shelby in 2013 and Alito's attitude today, that the idea is, well, they did it for partisan, they did it. The 15th Amendment may have like sort of born out of a partisan sentiment that involved racial enfranchisement. So why can't we say it's okay for partisan sentiment that disenfranchises people. It's almost the same, except for, I mean, that's sort of what it is, right? I mean, they think like, you did it to help win elections, so we can do it to help win elections, completely ignoring the idea that, well, there's also this other principle of like, we have a democracy.
Yes. I mean, look, I think you can, we talk, it starts earlier than Shelby County, right? So, in the 1980s, the Reagan administration is opposing a reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act because it adds an effects test to the Voting Rights Act that says any voting changes that have the purpose or effect of discriminating are illegal. And the reason why I did that was because there was a case that was involved, that involved over racial discrimination, or what was clearly racial discrimination, but you couldn't prove intent. And so in the end, what happened was that Black people were being denied the right to vote, even if you didn't have like a smoking gun where someone's using the M-word or something.
Right. This is like de facto. This is like a de facto test.
Right. And so Roberts, he's a young lawyer in the Justice Department, and he writes, this is terrible. Like, this is a justification for the most intrusive interference imaginable. And so I think, from an ideological point of view, Roberts has always seen efforts to alleviate racism as worse than racism itself, especially because, and you can see this every time they gut a piece of the Voting Rights Act, they congratulate themselves on how not racist the country is anymore.
Right.
But what we're seeing, with Republican efforts to sort of redraw their districts to get rid of all their plurality minority or majority minority districts, is that the thing that was holding back explicit racism in the United States wasn't like sort of that we're so much better than our ancestors, but it was the explicit prohibitions on that kind of discrimination. And it just illustrates why it was so important. And, at the time, Ruth Bader Ginsburg in Shelby County, she's like, it's like throwing away your umbrella when it stops raining because you're no longer getting wet. And, obviously we still need the umbrella, and we always needed it, but they simply didn't care because from an ideological point of view, they saw, this as a kind of unconstitutional federal government interference that was unjustifiable. And I think to some extent, it really goes back to the whole like states' rights issue. And again, this is, I really do think that some of the justices on the court have this idea that the Civil War amendments to the Constitution are sort of illegitimate, and that they ruined the real antebellum Constitution that was written by the founders. And so as a result, these amendments need to be narrowed because they're simply too expansive. They give the federal government too much power to interfere in the authority of the states. And you could see this in the Shelby County ruling when, John Roberts says that the Voting Rights Act, as it was written, interferes with the quote unquote equal sovereignty of the states, as though that's more important than people's constitutional right to vote. And I think, for that reason, they've simply approached any like federal effort to deal with racism as morally equivalent to racism itself. And this is something that the Professor Ian Haney Lopez.
Yeah, let me make this point because people like Ryan Bardwell and even people like John Galt, CT, all these weirdos who don't read books have generally no clue what they're talking about American culture. So calling out racism is racism. And I've never quite understood that particular point of view. What's up, Imperious?
Hey, God, you got the Three Stooges up there today. I question, like, where is the loss of the right to vote? You can decide, like, are they saying that?
Did you not hear what about 5 minutes ago I addressed?
No, I've been listening, but that's my point. He's saying they lost the right to vote. No, they didn't. It's
right.
just
Well,
that,
here's the deal. You don't have a right to representation. You don't have a right to have your personal viewpoint represented. And we all get this wrong. They're getting it wrong. I think Roberts gets it wrong.
they all get it wrong. We don't like the system is set up as a two-party system. You get what I mean? And that is what you get. You get the choice between the two parties, not your voice.
Well, I want to, no, you're right. But I also want to point out, and maybe you can help me because you have the education to help me understand. The system was set up for two parties, and it's just been reinforced that way, especially in the last, let's say, post World War II. But
yeah.
I need you to walk me through the process, and I honestly don't know. The Constitution assumed no political parties, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There's no
So
mention.
how do we? I understand because I mean, technically, the first two parties in my mind were Federalist and Anti-Federalist.
The Whigs too. The Whigs, I think, were there too.
Well, you remember Federalist and Anti-Federalist before the Constitution was even ratified.
Exactly. Yeah, that was the Constitutional Convention and the Federalist Papers.
Right.
You know what I mean? That was most.
So, walk me through. I guess.
Well, you're right. You're on track about what you've been saying the last week.
Why did we settle on two parties?
Well,
why not more than two?
I think what happened, I mean, I can't give you an exact, I mean, I don't think anybody knows exactly every single little, but what I've read and what I've understood is that it was kind of a cornucopia of instances where like you were talking about last week, how there's no American culture. That's kind of a representation of it. That the parties kind of evolved from the split of the culture from the founding between rural and urban.
Interesting. Yeah. Jefferson. Yeah. Okay.
And it was, and that's kind of how it started. And if you notice, I've also researched this in great deal, and not many people talk about this. It's a very interesting subject you might want to dig into on a show one time, is that it's not racial, it's not class. It has to do with population density.
Yeah. I've talked. Okay, please continue.
Well, something psychologically happens when people are condensed into smaller areas where the mind becomes more, quote, liberal and like group orientated and stuff like that. I think it's a necessity of just living within close proximity. There must be some biological trait to that. There's tons of psychological research on this, in that it's like when you get when you get smaller than like 2,500 people in a, like more dense than 2,500 people in a square mile, I think it's like 3 times more likely to be a liberal area than a conservative area. So I think a lot of it is biological, Stanley. I don't think it's racial. I don't think it's class. It's that when you live close to people, your biology changes. I mean, that's like lions and tigers do the same thing. Apes do the same thing. When apes get into close proximity, a lot of the time become more violent and stuff. And they become more.
Well, let me tell you, you are so right. And I personally, not like I'm some test case and it's all anecdotal, but I've talked a lot over the past couple years. Like, I grew up in Savannah, which when I grew up, it was a small city. It wasn't super urban, but it wasn't, necessarily rural either. Now I've lived in big cities. I've lived, one day I got a job in Front Royal, Virginia. And I'm driving up, I can't even remember the highway, but the Shenandoah Valley, if you look over to the right, if you're heading north, there's like the Blue Ridge Mountains. You can just see them. So I was interviewing for the job, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, gee, I wonder what it's like living in the mountains. So, it just so happened I got the job. I'm looking in, the wanted ads, the rentals, and there were 2 options that I was interested in. One was Troutville, West Virginia, which is just over the border next to I-81 in the Shenandoah Valley. a place that had like a trout river like within walking distance of the yard. And the only reason I didn't live there was because I didn't understand wood pellet stoves. Today, I probably would have done the West Virginia.
And I'll give you a kind of a statistical correlation to this, Stanley. What's one? I'll just give you one real big conservative city in America, Oklahoma City. Conservative city.
Yeah.
What's the population density per square mile?
I honestly don't know. But
1,123, less than that 2,500.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, what I mean is, if you go down the list, that 2,500 people per square mile statistic, it's a scary thing that you start to notice. If you take that and you go to different, like all the conservative versus liberal cities and see like how liberal one is versus how conservative, it trends with that
What's
number.
Bakersfield? Out of curiosity, because it's a conservative city.
Is it a conservative city? Let me see.
With a high crime rate. Last I checked,
Oh yeah, well you got
the
oil,
reason I
though.
even know this is I looked it up one day because Kevin, what's his name? The dude who was Speaker of the House, it's his district.
Kevin McCarthy. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
Kevin
was,
McCarthy.
Yeah, it was part of
And
his.
that's a Republican. It had a
It
Republican
is
there,
conservative.
but
It
with
is a
a
conservative,
high.
and it has,
Yeah.
but it's interesting. It is conservative, but kind of. It's 2,778 people per square mile, so it's close to that
Interesting.
number. You get what I'm saying?
That's why I asked, because I'm curious, because it's high crime conservative, but
you have Oildale there. Bakersfield
density.
Being from Southern California, I'll give you a little hint about Bakersfield. Bakersfield's split into like 4 cities, like Oildale. Oildale is like the redneck hick fucking oil workers like place, and that has all the tweaker crime, like the meth crime and all that. That's why Bakersfield's bad, because it has Oildale, like the meth tweaker white people. Yes, it's very, very tweaker central up there. Like very, very much.
My long-winded story.
No, you're right.
Hold on. I moved up to the Blue Ridge Mountains, like literally.
Those are so pretty,
road,
man.
Dude. It just, when I first moved up there, I was spooked by the quietness. It was quiet.
Oh yeah, you could hear it. Yeah,
dude.
yeah.
Dude,
it makes you think there's a predator
pulling
around because there's no birds or nothing.
I remember pulling up to the house, and it was a rented house. It's a pretty decent house with a basement and everything. So I pull up, and my car had like the automatic lights. You leave them on, they'll turn off once the car's off. So I had like groceries or something, and I didn't make it in time from the car to the porch. And it was dark. I couldn't fucking see my hand in front of my face.
Oh yeah. It's pitch black, bro.
But then I got used to it, and I remember going on a date to DC at this Thai restaurant. Some girl I met online, as a matter of fact. So I'm right next. At the time, it was the MCI Center, where they play basketball and the Capitals play hockey. Dude, I got into this restaurant, and it was noisy as hell, and it spooked me. I'm like, damn,
you get used to that kind of like peacefulness. I mean, Stanley, I got 5,000 people in my town.
Yeah.
So I get you, dude. I got 5,000 people in my town. So I get you, man.
So the point is you're right. That population density, that like, I might argue I've become more conservative. Dude, I could never live in a city. I can't. I can
and
never
not
live
conservative
in
as
an
in like
apartment
overall,
building.
like everything. But you see that your viewpoints become a little bit more conservative. Like, not that you're swinging one extreme to another. That's very rarely would ever happen. If that does happen to people, it either happens because of some crazy experience or because they don't really have any commitment. But you'll notice that if you go out of like big cities for a couple of years, you'll starting to have some more like conservative thing, like tendencies. You're like, I like, quietness. I don't like loud noises, so I want noise ordinances. I don't like, what I mean, like speeding down my street, so I want speed bumps and the cops to write tickets.
Dude, that's so funny, because I lived on a 1-lane gravel road. I'm like, dude, I had a neighbor of mine. who strung a metal guy wire across his road because some kid was, driving real fast on a four-wheeler. And I talked him out of it. Dude, you're going to decapitate this kid. You can't do that.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
like,
Dude,
I'm
have you seen the
tired of
videos
this
where
kid.
people close the? Have you seen the videos where the people in some of those like that have they own the one-way the one-way street, like it's on someone's property, but bike people keep riding through there. The guy closes it with a metal pole in the middle, and all these people just run straight into it and bounce right off of it. It's hysterical. But I'm not saying that's legal. You should be doing that because that is that is it has what you would say is that is a type of invitation because it's so open. The normal person wouldn't assume it's closed because there's no sign, there's no, you know what I mean? So people would ride down the bike there. Well, he just one day decided to just close it off with a metal pipe in the way, like a door, one of those closing things that for pipes, like a metal thing that closes to close a road down. People just were running into it.
I got a real good story for you. So my brother-in-law, who is, he calls himself a hillbilly, and he's probably right about that. So me, him, and a couple other guys we know, like neighbors, are standing at the edge of the driveway, and these people would come up from Maryland and just with their dirt bikes and shit and just ride these gravel roads.
Rev them and go loud and fly down the street. Oh yeah, dude.
Oh, dude, their dogs, their kids. I mean, and this is the sort of place where, my son used to walk the dog up and down that gravel road, and all the neighbors knew him. I didn't have to be real worried. Something happened, they'll find me or take care of it and then find me. So my brother-in-law and his two buddies, they're like, you know what? We can't have this anymore. So they hopped in their fucking trucks and they found these people, and they're like, let's hear this. Don't come up here anymore. Like, don't bring your dirt bikes. Don't bring your four-wheelers. If you do it again, there's going to be real trouble. They hunted those people down. They like fucking tooled around till they found them and just said, hey, it's done. Don't come back here anymore. And
I'll give you yeah. Stanley, well, I got to run to the store, but I'll give you a quick example before I leave. Another example, I used to go to Lake Havasu a lot when I was in California all the time. When I was in high school, I'd go to Havasu a lot of the time. And you, on the California side, you go over the Nevada side and you try to ride your dirt bikes and you do your boat on the Nevada side of the lake and stuff. Or on the, dude, you're screwed, bro. Like the cops, the sheriffs in the Nevada side will hunt you down, man. Like they will hunt you down. Like they don't even, like they will, dude, those sheriffs on the Nevada side will take speedboats and chase after people that come from like the California side and do waves and like no wake zones and stuff like that. They will fly after these people and like I've seen them confiscate boats and tow them, and dude, big, you know what I mean? Because they don't play games on the lake, dude. There's a lot of more rules than there are on the road. You know what I mean? And it's the same kind of thing. Like people in Nevada don't want these California people coming up here on vacation on Lake Havasu and screwing up their houses where they live. Because people on the California side just come up there once in a while for vacation for a week or two, but the Nevada side, people live there. You know?
Right.
So,
well,
Anyways,
I think it probably would have gone a little bit better had one of those people that they cornered actually owned property up there. It'd be like, hey, this is how we do it. Your property owner, it's okay. Learn the rules. But no, these people weren't. They were outsiders. And dude, I'm some black city dude, but hey, I had no problems with what they did.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying, dude. You know what I mean? Like you can't, Yep. So,
yep.
Anyways, man, I'll be back.
Okay. Take it easy.
Bye-bye.
Folks, anybody who wants to click the link, it is posted. Come on up and kibitz. And this won't be a long show. I do want to finish this. And then there's a Kimberly Crenshaw, which I know will impress Imperius a lot. I think she's right in this it's less than an hour interview, but she talks about race neutral. And I just thought she was just right. So here we go. Let's finish this.
Reactionary color blindness. So it's saying affirmative action is the same thing as Jim Crow.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, but this ideology, when you distill it to that, Adam, I hadn't heard it described that way about those amendments and the illegitimacy of it. But it really does color, I think, the conservative ideology quite well and what this court represents, which is a court of Confederates. I think if we speak about it in those terms, it strips away a lot of the, I guess, highfalutin, fancy ways, the priest-like ways that these the justices believe that they, operate, that's how they operate. They are just trying to reify almost the Confederacy to a degree.
Well, look, I mean, again, the Civil War amendments were explicitly meant to, make sure that America was not a white man's government. That was their purpose. I know that sounds like quote unquote woke, but this is what the guys who wrote these amendments thought. They were trying to correct the original flaw of the Constitution, which was that it made it possible for there to be, an overclass as a result of its implicit protections for slavery. And so, in a way, it really is, the historian Eric Foner calls the Civil War amendments and Reconstruction the second founding, and it really is the second founding because it takes that first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence about everybody being created equal very seriously, and it tries to make that a reality. And immediately after, within 10 years of those amendments being adopted, a big chunk of the country says, well, we don't like that. We don't want that. We want a country that is explicitly, sort of class-based and the class is based on race. And so, unfortunately, this is just something that is a part of, I don't want to make it sound like it's inevitable because I don't think it is, but it is something that's like very deeply rooted in our history. And it's something we've been battling, since the founding of the country and arguably before.
I do think this is really just a battle as to what constitutes the founding of the country. And the past 100 years plus at this point, 150 years nearly, have been the overwhelming majority of our Supreme Court rulings, I think, are probably somewhere between 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. What do you think it is? Are we just really just sort of like seeing the slow motion backlash from the Voting Rights Act in '65?
Yes.
Okay, because let me just add one thing. This is the thing is that, Johnson famously said, we're going to lose the South for 2 generations. And I think he just overestimated how quickly what had happened would filter through to the American people. I can't remember the name of the professor. I cite this all the time. We had him on years ago. But the most interesting statistic I've ever heard, I think, was that up until 2008, 50% of non-college educated white people thought the Republicans were to the left of Democrats on race. Up until Obama gets elected, there is still a massive cohort of people who think the Democratic Party is the Democratic Party from 150 years ago. And it's almost as if it's just catching up now to where people are like, wait a second, when did Black people get the right to vote? This is, there's a certain cohort that the Republican Party it's almost caught up with them.
Yeah.
Well, the backlash to the Warren Court, and keep in mind, we had a liberal court for like a couple years, and it completely, it completely radicalized the conservative movement into like developing its own alternate legal movement for the
You
purpose.
get the Powell Doctrine, you get the Federal Society, you get the Heritage Foundation,
all that stuff. And, the National Review is publishing, criticisms of Brown v. Board, criticisms of the Civil Rights Act, criticisms of the Voting Rights Act. Barry Goldwater is, objecting in a moral sense to racism, but also saying, the federal government banning discrimination is like, even worse. So, this is like a core, I think, is like really core to the 20th century modern conservative movement and the conservative legal movement in particular. And I think, part of the issue here is that I think it's really the reaction to Barack Obama that provides it with this sort of momentum. Because then they can start saying, well, the racism issue is really solved now. We have a black president, who we opposed tooth and nail, and we said his healthcare bill was reparations or a civil rights bill, which is what Rush Limbaugh called it. And they could say, well, this racism problem has been solved. And I think to some extent, the reason
That's
why
literally what Scalia said, incidentally.
Well, one of the attorneys the attorneys for Shelby County said it's an old disease and the disease has been cured, which is like an absurd thing to say. Especially like at that moment where there was like a racist backlash to the black president happening. But I think, one of the things that happened was that there was this, particularly in the Obama era, Obama had such a massive cultural impact on like public facing jobs. So in media and entertainment, and particularly Congress got more diverse than it had ever been. There was this there was this integration of sort of elite America that occurred as a result of, so the cultural currents that were swirling around Barack Obama. And that gave people the perception of a more integrated America that didn't really exist, because occupational segregation, for example, has not budged since the 90s. We even though Eric Holder was Attorney General. I mean, you had that. That was real. Like, you had black people in positions of leadership. You had like more black shows on television. You had more black actors being cast in movies and TV shows. Not like overwhelmingly, but there was like, a significant change. And there was this sort of, this incredible reactionary backlash to it. I mean, now whenever you see people complaining about like The Little Mermaid is black or something like that, It seems silly, but that kind of stuff is actually about labor. It's actually saying we don't think black people should have those jobs. And that's, and now, we're saying something like that when it comes to Congress. Like, this decision is most likely going to result in fewer.
I think that's a really interesting point. Because one of the things they talked about a lot was black jobs. And so did people like Yvette Carnell, black jobs. The immigrants are taking your jobs, your black jobs. No, blacks can't be CEOs or anything like that. He's dead on with that point.
In a less diverse Congress, because 50% of the black American population lives in the South. So if Republican controlled states can simply wipe out all their black districts, because technically it's partisan gerrymandering, not racial gerrymandering, it doesn't violate the 15th Amendment, then you're going to see, a lot of black representatives lose their districts. Now, I don't know how that plays out in the long term. I think stuff like this is sometimes difficult to game out because, again, like, who knew that Donald Trump was going to crack the blue wall in 2016? I think that, some people did, some people anticipated that, but very few people, I think, really were anticipated it. I mean, things happen that we do not expect. So, I don't necessarily know that this is going to go the way that they're planning for it to go, but it's certainly motivated by a feeling of being threatened by, the rise of black people in elite places where, these people feel like they don't really belong. I mean, you can see that now with the way Hegseth is running the military, with the way the Civil Rights Division is being run, suing schools for having too many black students, like Yale Medical School for having too many. I mean, like, this is, I think the Voting Rights Act is part of a broader agenda of elite resegregation that is itself a backlash to, not just Barack Obama, but the more diverse elite class that emerged as a result of his election.
Do you think? I'm just curious about the idea of, because we spent a lot of time on this program in the wake of Trump and in 2016, and I want to say like a lot of time, as in like 4 or 5 years, talking about the sort of the notion of this racial backlash. And how much of that do you think was just a function of like they shouldn't have this job, that it was economic, as much as like you have some form of, and not necessarily, across the board, but there was an animus about not being centered in the same way in culture.
Yeah, I do think that's a big part of it.
I mean, my example is just like, I'm turning on the TV and all of a sudden, like, why is this black guy on the Cialis commercial? That should be me. Who's getting that? Or, because as a white kid, you're growing up in 1975, 1980, and literally everything you see, you are centered. It's either you as a dad, and it's either you in the future, or it's your future. It's your mom, or it's your future wife, or, whether it's a commercial or a TV show. It's like almost all of them. And then all of a sudden that goes away.
I mean, you can see it right now with this whole stupid controversy over the Odyssey and like having black people in the Odyssey. Like, it's simply the idea, it is a sort of like reverse cultural appropriation discourse almost. Like nobody's mad that Matt Damon is in Greek, but they're mad that Lupita Nyong'o is black. Right. And it's explicit racism. It's like, this is our stuff, this belongs to us, and you shouldn't be a part of it. And also, it extends to, and I think the absurd thing about the Odyssey in particular is like when you start talking about like Shakespeare or antiquity, like these are materials that have been put on by diverse casts for generations. They've all, like Paul Robeson did Macbeth in Haiti. You know what I mean? Like this is like a very old thing. The idea that the Odyssey explicitly only belongs to like white guys who were born between 1960 and today is sort of absurd. But I do think there is, again, I don't want to say that everybody who voted for Trump was motivated by that, but I do think that this ideological vanguard that surrounds Trump, when you look at their preoccupations and what they use as propaganda to sort of get people riled up and motivate people, it is this kind of like explicitly culture war stuff that has like a sort of serious economic undertone of like, black people shouldn't have those kinds of jobs. Black people shouldn't be in Congress. Black people shouldn't be in movies. Black people shouldn't be directing movies. They shouldn't be showrunners. They shouldn't be in writers' rooms. This kind of stuff, it seems silly, but then when you dig underneath, what we're really talking about is, to some extent, economic segregation in elite professions.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it still rings in my head, and this isn't specifically about the white supremacy piece, but it feeds into it. Is when Trump won, there was some anonymous banker that gave a quote to the Financial Times about how we get to say the R word again. And, that's about another marginalized community, but it's about a feeling of empowerment. And
they wanted to say, we're allowed to say the N word again.
Exactly.
But they just said R word. Right. It's like a limited hangout.
But that banker is maybe a little bit not the base of his support, although maybe the base of his financial support, but the people.
Hey, Cam, in a way, I might actually agree. Cam says, or out on a limb says, society was cooked once the Little Mermaid was black. Well, we agree American society specifically was cooked, but not for the same reasons. American society was cooked when it obsessed over the race of fictional and non-existent cartoon characters. No such thing as mermaids. Fiction implies that the mermaid could be anything. So society was cooked when it started obsessing over Disney characters.
The evangelical base, the base of Christian conservatives that was always there, and was Bush's base as well. That's why we shouldn't treat Trump as such an anomaly. Like his blondness, his whiteness, and the kind of prosperity gospel that he embodies is very much, even if he's from New York, a cultural product of the South, the Confederacy, and white supremacy.
I mean, if you look, the politics of, if you go sort of antebellum politics, the Democratic Party is very much about this idea of equality between white men, who are the head of their households. You are in charge. Your wife and your slaves obey you. And this sort of elevates all white men, regardless of economic status, to a tier of status above everybody else. And when you look at sort of, again, it's not everybody. I think a lot of people, sort of normal people with conservative views are put off by it. But when you look at sort of this ideological vanguard of the American right, they're really obsessed with this stuff, with this kind of nostalgia of, this era when, white men's, enhanced status in American society was unquestioned. And that's not wholly an economic thing. But, obviously there is sort of an economic base for it. I mean, it comes out of the culture of chattel slavery. But, people, the way that economics interacts with people's ideological views is more complicated than a one-to-one. And I do think that, as that banker who you were talking about, that guy is probably not suffering economically, but he was suffering from a sense that he wasn't allowed to denigrate the people who he considers beneath him without suffering some kind of social stigma. Yeah. And I think there are a lot of people who voted for that. I don't know that everybody did. I mean, you look at the sort of broader economic trends across the world, incumbent parties suffered similar setbacks as a result of, the post-COVID inflation. But, there were people who absolutely voted for Trump because they felt like he was going to bring, and you saw this immediately after he won, this sort of cultural vibe shift where it was kind of cool to be a racist asshole again.
Yes.
And then, it pan out as, in the way that they wanted it to.
As Elon Musk said, comedy is legal again. And so let's talk. I want to talk about sort of the backlash to what we're seeing in both in terms of what ultimately is going to be solutions are on the table. But I've seen, I think I've read something to the effect that John Lewis, when it came to those rulings in the 80s, had some hesitation because there was a sense that it would undermine perhaps the white progressive, whatever you would have called it in that era, and black progressive coalitions that would form. And I wonder if what your thoughts are both on the potential for that in the wake of this, but also, as I read that in 2012, I think I had Glenn Ford on, who was the late Glenn Ford from the Black Agenda report, who was arguing to me that Obama was in fact the greater of two evils, and that the problem he had with Obama, or one of the large ones, was that Obama was undercutting the black radical tradition. That and I think the radicalism being on a spectrum in terms of and I wonder if it was just Obama or if the CBC, which is surprisingly, I don't know what you want to call it, moderate, corporatist, establishment oriented, not radical, but not even on the spectrum towards radicalism in the way that we understand it today. I wonder if that's going to change the nature of Black representation of the CBC, or if there is like a situation where, I think we could have surprises in the wake of this gerrymandering because of the nature of this cycle.
Right.
But I'm
So
talking.
I think the serious critique of the majority minority district stuff was that these districts allowed Republicans to keep their districts redder and to, segregate off, not in a racial sense, but to make blue districts in Republican states safe blue so that they can make the rest of the state red. And Democrats in those states were fine with it because then they had these safe seats that were sort of like fiefdoms that they could keep getting elected to. And I think that is the reason why actually that we don't know what the outcome of this is going to be in terms of, I think Republicans think that this is going to lessen the power of Black voters. And as a result, there are going to be fewer, it will insulate them from the consequences of the Trump era politics they've embraced, which is one of like overt racial discrimination. I mean,
this point about Democrats being fine with the safe Democrat seats, excellent point. Democrats have their fingerprints on this stuff too.
I'm looking at, I live in Texas here in San Antonio, and, I'm looking at ads and it's like, Chip Roy supports Sharia law. It's like really like lowest common denominator, gutter racist stuff. And, I'm not sure that that's going to work out precisely the way they want, because as long as Black people can vote, people are going to try to get those votes, right? And so if in a close contest, you may find some Republican politicians thinking, well, maybe if I appeal to Black voters, that'll give me an edge over my opponent, especially in states, like Louisiana, like Mississippi, where those populations really are substantial. So I don't know what the
So do you think that it could end up moderating the Republican Party in some fashion? I mean, one of the problems we have now is that
it's a possible outcome. I think the problem with that possibility, or the thing that would that would prevent that possibility, is that if this snowballs further than it already has, because what happened after Reconstruction was that Black people were not immediately completely disenfranchised. That, that full disenfranchisement happens almost partially as a reaction to the coalitions that Black people are making with working class white people and the populace. This really freaks the Democrats out. And they go on like a total rampage campaign of terror that ends in like total Black.
Literal. South Carolina, they're killing politicians because they're trying to get Appalachian, the idea of like Appalachian whites, more progressive and more populist, I should say, too, economically, forming a coalition with Blacks. They literally end up killing people in South Carolina and driving these politicians out of town.
It is an existential threat to the Democratic Party at that moment, and they respond to it, with the tools that the Democratic Party at the time is equipped with, which is violence and terrorism. And it works for a period of time. But I think, again, there's a couple of things, I don't think that they know what the long-term effects of this will be, both on either part, to be honest. It's actually possible that the Democratic Party becomes more conservative as a result of, it being of the influence of Black voters being diminished in these areas. That's what happened with the Republican Party when they, no longer had a Black constituency in the South to appeal to. But the other, it really depends on like how much this snowballs. The disenfranchisement, the complete disenfranchisement of Black people coincided with a campaign of terror and overt discrimination and the imposition of Jim Crow. So I think we don't know how this is going to go. I think it's unjustifiable, but I don't think it necessarily ends in a way that is like easily predictable over the long term. In the short term, obviously, I think it results in, a diminishing of Black representation in Congress, which is the goal. But I just like the fact is that Black people are never going to give up trying to be free and equal. That just, that didn't happen, after Reconstruction. It didn't happen with the campaigns of terrorism that followed Reconstruction. It didn't happen after Plessy versus Ferguson. It's just not going to happen because Alito wrote, a stupid opinion justifying racial discrimination in voting. It's just, Black people are never going to stop fighting for their right to be free and equal. And so, the fight is just simply not over. It's just not the end. What effect it will have on the parties, I don't know, but I know that this is not going to be the end of the story.
I would also think that the dynamics in terms of white people voting for Black candidates has changed in some very significant ways that both impact Republican voters, but also, Democratic voters. I mean, I think there's just like a greater willingness by white people to vote for a Black candidate in ways that we just can't predict in some of those seats. But with that said, obviously there's going to be some type of political pushback, or hopefully. What do you think are the solutions to what we're seeing now? I think
there's a number of solutions. One is that you need to pass another Voting Rights Act, and you have to strip the Supreme Court of jurisdiction to hear it. And you also have to figure out a solution to the Supreme Court problem. Now, maybe that's a vacancy, maybe that's adding seats to the Supreme Court. My view, and I expressed this years ago, was that the Roberts Court's jurisprudence on voting was interfering with the American people's ability to govern themselves, and therefore the constitutional hardball of adding.
Let me make one point about this gerrymandering thing. Both parties are literally just occupying people with this gerrymandering issue. The real problem is even white people aren't being represented the way they should. The House of Representatives is capped at 435. The population of America, just since I was a kid to now, has gone up by damn near 100 million. We need more representatives. So gerrymandering is a problem, but it's literally a bait and switch that both parties are occupying the normal American voter with. We're not being represented, whether you're Black or white, the way we should be. So maybe people need to pull their heads out of their asses and start looking at the actual issues.
Seats to the court was justified. And this is not unprecedented. Republicans will try to tell you it's unprecedented, even though they have occasionally done it on the state level. But, during
they've done it 3 times in the past 5-10 years or so, I guess.
Yes. But, even during Reconstruction, the Republicans take away vacancies on the court. They shrink the court so that Andrew Johnson can't appoint anybody, and then they expand it after he's gone. So the idea that, this is something that has never been done before, it is absolutely not true. And I think the issue here is it's not a question of like policy differences. Like, it would be one thing if the Supreme Court was simply conservative, but my view is that the Roberts Court is directly interfering with the ability of the American people to govern themselves, to exercise self-determination. And that is something that requires a hardball response.
How do you fashion a new Voting Rights Act where there's no jurisdiction?
Congress has the authority to jurisdiction is stripping. Jurisdiction stripping is something.
I know they have the ability to do that, but how in reality, how's that end up functioning?
I do not. Honestly, I do not know. They're going to be like, there are a number of solutions. There are much smarter people than me who have figured out who have have written up plans to sort of figure out how to get around the Supreme Court's jurisprudence in this area. I mean, when you look back at like Charles Sumner, his argument, he actually didn't think the 15th Amendment he thought it did not go far enough. And his argument was that the constitutional guarantee of a Republican government in every state already enfranchised all Black people regardless of the amendment anyway. I think there's a number of routes to do it. I think there is obviously no route that the current majority of the Supreme Court would accept. They have 6 votes. They could do anything they want with those 6 votes. And they have shown a complete disregard for the effects of their rulings when it comes to voting. They've just completely ignored the effect that they're removing the Voting Rights Act's protections has resulted in politicians trying to disenfranchise their Black constituents. It just does not seem to bother them at all. I mean, there were a couple of voting rights activists who objected to Alito's characterization of Black voting turnout increasing since Shelby County, since that wasn't actually true from Obama going forward. So it's misleading, and it's misleading in a way.
He also cited a fact. He also cited a fake fact. I think in his ruling, is my understanding as well along those lines. Not only he said 2 out of the last 5 elections, but those 2 were before they got rid of Section 5 preclearance. But I believe there was another statistic that he cited that came from the brief that was just not factual. I guess we'll see what the future brings in terms of this. It's going to be interesting, but the hostility. I guess I also want to add that their complete 180 on Purcell, the doctrine about interfering with that seems to totally give up
close to elections, except when we want you to,
unless they've already started.
Yeah.
Literally, unless people have already voted. I think it really gives away the game.
I mean, Alito sort of tiptoes around the idea. But the outrage that a lot of people on the left felt when the Supreme Court was allowing, obvious racial gerrymanders to go forward, unconstitutional maps to go forward in elections on the grounds that it would be too confusing. I mean, I think their view is the reverse of that, which is that the maps that have, like the Louisiana map with 2 Black districts, that was racist. Getting rid of the second Black district wasn't racist. It just, adding another Black district out of 6 in a state that is 1/3 Black, that to them was racist. I think Alito in particular. I mean, so the way to look at it, and the way to understand it, in my view, is that it's just the old reverse racism canard. That these laws that are meant to prevent racial discrimination are themselves racist against white people, and therefore this is like a great injustice that is being righted, and that's why they're allowing these maps to go forward, regardless of their earlier rulings on the Purcell principle.
Adam Serwer, author, staff writer at The Atlantic. We will link to your piece on this Calais and just sort of in general, the Voting Rights Act. We really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Adam.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.
You're probably a critical race theorist. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be an advocate. You don't have to be an activist.
So
you just have to be literate.
This is a video that's definitely worth watching, at least for me. She's really good with a turn of language, and she has obviously thought about colorblind law.
About the way that
it's Kimberly Crenshaw. This is called "We Must Stand Up to Authoritarianism."
race works in this world. You don't want to help your children or other people understand how race might be working, then okay, you are an opponent to critical race theory. But if you think this is literacy, then you're on our side on this debate. You can resist those who try to infantilize you. You can resist those who tell you that your history is insignificant, your story is irrelevant, your aspirations are unrealizable. Our only choice is to show up, bend that arc of the moral universe towards justice.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru Murthy, and this is the podcast where we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest today is simply one of the most influential thinkers in the world, whose work has given generations the language and framework to think about social justice and discrimination. Kimberly Crenshaw is best known for being behind the term intersectionality, the recognition that race, gender, and class overlap to create unique forms of discrimination. And she is a founding figure in critical race theory, the argument that racism is structural. She has written a gripping memoir called Backtalker, including a fiery epilogue about the backlash against her life's work, the war on woke, and what it's really about. Kimberly, welcome. Thank you very much for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here.
If you could change the world with one fell swoop, how would you change it?
You know, that's a challenging question for me because I'm not one that believes in grand theories, but I will say this. I think that if the world had a lot less inequality, a lot less intergenerational exclusion, if we were able to think more critically about our past, we'd be in a better position to deal with some of the consequences today. So I, not surprisingly, believe that we could do a lot better with a lot more back talking against those who say the world that we live is the only world that's actually possible. We can't change things. We can't disrupt the existing social order. I think if we could critically talk back against that, it would change the world significantly.
So why Backtalker?
Yeah.
And does it have the same connotations for you as it does for many people here, which is about impertinence, rudeness sometimes, arrogance,
challenging authority.
authority?
Exactly. So I think the simplest way to frame it is when we are looking at a global move to authoritarianism, the response should be to challenge authority. So I try to take back talking as a way of reframing how we think about whether back talking is a good idea, as a way of reminding us that when we have authoritarians who are dictating how we should think and how we should move, we're basically being infantilized. So starting from that position of authority, telling us as citizens what's possible, how we move, how we should think, we should talk back against that. So that was why I called it Back Talking. It has a little bit of an autobiographical dimension to it as well.
You have a story very early on about a physical reaction of revulsion, of sickness to a discriminatory situation you're in.
Yeah.
Do you think we all innately understand right and wrong, discrimination, all of those things? Do you believe it is there?
You know, I do think that it's there with respect to us as individuals. I think individuals have a sense of when they feel that they've been treated wrongly. Now, sometimes they're wrong about that, but I haven't met anyone yet who hasn't had some kind of moment when they're willing to say that was unjust towards me. I think the challenge is being able to understand historical contours of injustice, understanding what happens when entire groups have been treated unfairly, understanding about how unfairness of the past continues to shape and throw a shadow over contemporary unfairness.
Can you tell our viewers and listeners about that instance?
Yeah, so it's an instant where I was invited to an all-male finishing club at Harvard University. And I was invited to this as one of 3 Black students in an all-Black study group. And our friend was the first Black person, or at least he told us he was the first Black person who was a member of this club and wanted to invite us as guests. My other friend, another Black man, and I said, well, we don't know if we really want to be guests in this club, but we're going to go and we're not going to take any stuff is what we said. So when we got there and we knocked on the door, our friend opened the door and stepped outside and didn't let us enter the club. We got ready to rumble because we thought this was the kind of indignity that we had both agreed we were not going to accept. And what our friend said to us was, relax, relax. It's not what you think. Namely, I'm not going to give you the business because you're Black. But he did say, you have to go around to the back door. Kim has to go around to the back door because we don't allow women through the front door. Now, in my mind, this was precisely the kind of stuff that we had this sort of pact around. We agreed that we were going to support each other. But my friend thought that that pact only extended to ways in which we were excluded in the same way. If we were excluded because of our race, then the pact was on and it was good. If I was excluded because of another reason, I didn't gain entry into the club on the same basis that he did, then we had no mutual support pact. And I was shocked by it. I was angered by it, but I was also disciplined by it because I knew they didn't want me to make a scene. I didn't want to embarrass us as a group. So I ended up going around to the back door. And I started the book with that because that to me was a point of departure. I got sick that night from whatever I drank. And I think because I got sick and made my, deal with the universe like many people do when they get sick and they say, please, if the room just stops spinning, I'll never do this thing again. Well, the thing I was able to say at that moment is I will never consume what I consumed this night, which was voluntary humiliation. I'm not going to do it, even if someone in my group is asking me to do it, even if the idea is that we as a people, whatever the we is, will be advanced if you take this sacrifice, you take this hit for the team. I get physically ill when I'm asked to engage in what I call asymmetrical solidarities. That was my sort of wake up moment. And since that time, I've really spoken back against, or I've talked back against these expectations.
Of course, we didn't have the language of intersectionality.
We didn't, right?
When you were a young student,
right?
But that set you on the road.
That's right.
To that framework.
Exactly. And so, as I say throughout the book, I try to tell the story of intersectionality, my own relationship to intersectionality, not as a top down, I was in my office somewhere and an epiphany came to me and I wrote it down, but as a bottom up, experience up, having these moments where there's something that happened that made me feel something. Sometimes it was, illness. Sometimes it was disappointment. Sometimes it was just hurt. Sometimes it was bewilderment or pain. I started collecting these moments and asking, what holds them together? What makes me think that there is a connection between the time I was a little girl and wanted to be the princess and the time that my friends wanted me to go around to the back door and other times over the course of my history? So tying those all together, there was a there, but the question was how to explain the there and what kind of name to give that there-ness.
Yes, and you wanted to be the princess in the school play.
Yeah.
This story really chimed with me because I wanted to play Jesus in The Son of Man by Dennis Potter when I was at school. Right. And I wasn't chosen because Jesus had to be white.
Yes, right.
And you had the same thing.
Yeah, so it was this. I was in kindergarten, and there was this little sing-song thing that our teacher had us do, and I think it was a mashup of Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, all of the fairy tales that involve a beautiful, desirable, lovely little princess that everyone cares about and whose well-being is, important to the characters in the little story. And so I got to play kind of every role. So I was the mouse who scurried about. I was the horse who took the princess to meet the prince. I was everything. I was especially good at being the Wicked Witch. My teacher cast me in that role a lot of times. I thought that what I was doing, playing these roles with gusto,
Now, some of these little biographical vignettes she tells are obviously hyperbolic. So be warned.
I was cast as Pontius Pilate.
Okay, well there you have it. Exactly. So you know this story, right? You know this story. So you keep thinking, I am showing my good nature. I'm showing how well I can like throw myself into this role. Surely, eventually, my teacher will cast me as the princess. And as I got closer to the end of the school year, I started to panic because it looked like it might not happen. I was kind of worried that is there a reason why I'm not getting cast here? But I said, my teacher likes me. She sees I'm really good. As we get to the last week and then the last day, I'm bugging her every hour, like, Miss B, are we going to do Thorn Rosa? That was the name of this character. And she would say, tomorrow, in an hour, the last hour, soon. We get to the last couple minutes of the whole school year. And I've not been Thorn Rosa and I'm about to break. And I say, please, are we going to do it? She says, yes. We started. They sing the song. Just as I'm about to enter, the bell rings. And so all of this deep anxiety and worry and maybe the hint that something was amiss, I didn't really match up with her view of what Thorn Rosa should look like, just came bubbling up.
Huh. This is interesting.
Up and I'm crying.
Let's see what happened here. Oh, I know what happened.
My brother comes over from the other side of the schoolyard asking, who is this Thorn Rosa? Where can I find her? Because he thought Thorn Rosa had beaten me up. And for me, it was a point of departure in a couple of ways. My parents did end up calling my teacher to find out what went wrong. The teacher told them what had happened, and it eventually came to my home, promised that I'd be Thorn Rosa the next year. I knew there was no Thorn Rosa, possibility. I was not princess material, but it was a point of departure because of what my parents did. My parents didn't tell me, why are you crying about something so silly? There's so many other more important things in the world. They didn't say, well, who cares about being a princess? They understood for a little girl, being a princess is sort of a dream. Of course she would want that. And they didn't tell me that my feelings were overblown or illegitimate. What they did do was affirm that there had been some kind of an injury there. We might not have a name for it. It might not line up with all the other things that we as African Americans in the 60s were fighting in that moment, discrimination, exclusion from political power, but there was a there. That affirmation that there was a there set me on a path of, okay, I should follow my feelings. I should interrogate them. I should question what's going on. And that, I think, is what allowed me eventually to say, there's a shadow that's being cast on little girls like me. We don't have a name for it yet, but there is something here that I eventually ended up naming intersectionality.
I mean, you obviously had an incredible upbringing. I mean, your parents must have been pretty special as well.
Yeah.
Because at a very, very young age, upon the death of Martin Luther King Jr., you stood up in church.
Yes. So my parents and my grandparents on both sides are what we call in the African American community in the United States, race men and women of the 20th century. And what that meant was they were fully aware that there were barriers and obstacles that we were born into. In fact, even when I was born, I often say I was not born into a state of freedom because many of the laws that were passed in the 60s had not been passed when I was born. We didn't have equal right to employment. We didn't have equal rights to housing and to voting. All of these came in the middle of the civil rights movement as I was watching these things on television. And Martin Luther King was a very well-respected figure in that movement and also in my household. So when we got the phone call from my grandfather that Martin Luther King had been assassinated, it was the first time I saw my father just bend over in tears. I'd never seen that before. And so, of course, I listened and I paid attention and followed what the significance of this murder of someone that we didn't know personally, but were deeply, invested in. It was clear that it was going to impact the forward momentum of the we. And we was very much a part of our family's understanding of who we were historically and where our interests were thought to be. So the next day when we were in school, and I think I was in third grade, the local activists brought us all into a church to help us process our feelings about Martin Luther King's assassination. We were like from kindergarten to high school. And they asked, well, does anyone have anything to say? And I looked around and was waiting for the older kids to say something. And it just became so painful, not just that Martin Luther King had been assassinated, but that his martyrdom did not create any words. There was nothing to say to it. And to me, it's one thing that the attempt to arrest our movement happened through a murder. It was worse to acquiesce to it and not have anything to say to it. So I don't know. I jumped up. I didn't have anything to say. I didn't know what I was going to say. But it felt important to fill that space with something. And so, little ideas came to me. The only public speaking I'd ever done was Easter poems. I didn't have anything to say. And at some point, something came out. I think it must have been what I heard my parents say, maybe something on the radio, but something to the effect that we have to walk in his footsteps. We can't allow this to turn us around. So I gave a little third grader speech about the importance of Martin Luther King and sat down, and then the nerves showed up. I was like, what was I thinking? But I do have to say it was an important moment because, we didn't have Twitter back then. We didn't have social media. We just had the telephone. So somebody must have called my parents as I was walking home to tell them what had happened. And when I got home, my father's eyes were still puffy, but he was proud of me and lifted me up and squeezed me real tight. And it was exactly the kind of affirmation that one gets from one's parents about the importance of speaking back to the world in which we had been born into.
Finding the words is clearly the theme of your life.
Yeah.
Why do you think you've been so gripped with this need to find the language and to define terms?
Yeah. I've said that I don't know if I find these words to talk back because of anything inherent in me or because of the family I was born into or the period of time that I was born into when millions of people were talking back, not just in my country, but all around the world. People were talking back to the logics of colonialism and imperialism and genocide and white supremacy. And so there was a spirit of talking back that was not just in politics, but it was in culture. It was in music. My family was a family made up of musicians. So music was always part of our self-understanding. And a lot of the music was carrying this message of talking back. I remember when one of the most consequential songs came out was James Brown. It was Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. That was hugely significant because just prior to that moment where culture lifted this shift, the idea that you would call yourself Black was not a good idea. And then after the song, people were proud to be Black.
Because you were colored.
Because we were colored or we're still Negroes. So shifting from colored and Negro to Black, and Black being a source of pride, not something to apologize for, something that underwrote our expectations that things were going to get better and we were going to be in a better position, and we were preparing ourselves for that moment when society would finally open itself up. This was all part of the ethos of the moment.
But how much do you think the lack of words and the lack of language was part of the instruments of oppression?
Well, so I will say that moment I was just talking about, the movement from colored to black, was a moment that presented to me the recognition that what we call ourselves, the words, actually are meaningful. They carry a political, they carry a cultural, a social meaning that allows you to help shift your reality. So I think words became significant having lived through that, but also words were significant because my parents required us to come to the dinner table with something to say. We lived life not just to have life happen to us, but for us to think about, to engage, to have something to say about the things that happen. So trying to search for the words to explain what happened was something that I had to do from the time I was a kid. My friends used to kind of tease me because we'd be playing and, I'd say, oh, shoot, it's about dinner time. I've got to stop because I've got to sit here and think about how do I put into words what I've been feeling or what I've been seeing or what my experience of the day was. So it goes way, way back to my earliest moments of having to kind of do homework for dinner.
And that is why I guess there are lots of people who now want to put those words back in a box or erase them altogether.
Yeah, well,
because they have
that's true.
power.
And that's one of the most important things that I had to learn just in sitting through and watching words and concepts that I had come up with to provide a prism to see things better that judges didn't see well, that some of our allies didn't see well, in order to better advance what I thought was sort of a common agreed upon imperative to create more equality and create conditions of less injustice. So to watch these ideas be redefined, I even say regentrified, because the community interests that were packed into these words has been cleared out, and opposing ideas have been placed into these words. Of course, it's been disappointing, but it also just made me double down to say, you don't get to just redefine something or put words in the mouths of people who've articulated things that counter the whole purpose of why they were doing it. So the idea of the memoir, as opposed to a political tract or a treatise with all the cases on intersectionality and all the uses of intersectionality all over the world to push back against those who say intersectionality is no longer meaningful or useful. Rather than doing that, I wanted to tell a story about where the word came from ground up, not from office down. So my response to those who try to unravel it is to say, here are the experiences out of which these ideas have come. You can contest the ideas, but you can't create a whole narrative about where these ideas came from that aren't true to at least my understanding of my own story.
So can we then go to critical race theory?
Sure.
And where the stories are from your own life? Because again, critical race theory is something that is now defined by the other side.
Yes.
As something they want to erase, as something that is riven with hate, and is oppressive in itself. What is critical race theory in simple terms?
Yeah. Well, critical race theory is basically the idea that racial inequality and other forms of inequality are often embedded in systems that appear to be colorblind and neutral. But to the extent that they reproduce disadvantages, marginalizations, discriminations from the past, they still do racial work. They still help create and produce racially disparate outcomes. These are not just their features of our institutions. They're not things that are natural. They are things that have been created. And once they're created, their ability to continue to do the same things that they used to do is often uninterrupted. So we need to think critically about the stories that we're told about why certain groups are not in one profession and are located or ghettoized in another one. We have to think critically about why the stories that we tell about our relative nations are stories that are celebratory and don't often tell the full truth. about how we have wound up where we are. So critical race theory started with looking at law, what law was missing, what law was doing, how law was reproduced.
And this is something I've been trying to point out for years. Critical race theory didn't just come along in the past 5 years or 10 years. It's been around in the legal academy, I think, since like the mid to late 70s. That's why people just listen to people like Christopher Rufo and Trump. It's misinformation that people like Trump, Christopher Rufo, DeSantis, and a lot of their ilk, they purposefully mislead their voters. And look at what the misinformation has wrought. A fucking war that an incompetent, feckless president can't seem to figure out. A guy like Hegseth, who literally is incompetent. Rubio I think Rubio is actually trying to run the government. I think Rubio is actually like the vice president. And fucking JD Vance is just there because he's got a cool beard. This is what information has gotten you, MAGA voters.
Reducing certain inequalities that it created. And then it moved outside of law as people started thinking, well, it's not just law that creates race. We understand that other institutions, other practices, even things like the market produces things that we have associated with racialized groups and racial inequality. And it's because it helps people think critically. It's because it helps people ask questions or talk back to people who say it is what it is and there's no change in it because God created it that way. It's because it helps people criticize those ideas that it's been attacked. One of my mentors always says that if something is moving, if it's a vehicle, then those who oppose where it's going are going to try to describe it in a negative way. They're going to try to take it away. So what I've tried to do with critical race theory, number one, is show many people that the way they think about their lives actually counts as critical race theory. If they reject the idea that color blindness actually describes the world, if they reject the idea that history has nothing to do with this contemporary moment, if they're able to read situations and say, I see race at work there, or I see gender at work there, they are actually thinking critically about the status quo. They're thinking critically about how we've arrived here. That's why people want to attack it and distort it.
So just explain what, so many people really struggle with the idea, I think, that there's something wrong with colorblindness because it seems like, naturally the most innately fair thing to be.
Yeah.
Why isn't it?
Let me give you an example that actually comes from the memoir that happened between my brother and me. And then I think people might understand it in a broader context. I told a story about how my father had this rule that if either my brother or me came to him to complain about the other one mistreating the other, we would both get punished. Now, my brother was 8 years older than me. He came into this system with advantages that came from the fact that he was a boy, he was bigger, and he was older. What that, let's say, age-neutral rule did was privilege him over me. It meant that he could harass me, bully me, knowing that he had the power to do it, because the rule meant that we would both get punished if I went to complain about it. And it was only when I realized that the way the rule was working, I was always going to get punished one way or the other, either by my brother or by my father. But the only way that the condition on the ground, as it were, would change is if I went and told my father and took a risk that we both get punished. Now, to my parents, it was an epiphany when I showed up and said, you know what? I know I might get punished for this, but it's unfair that my brother gets to bully me, and you're not going to do anything about it. This rule is asymmetrical. It does not work. That was an epiphany for me because number one, it showed me that sometimes when you challenge unfair power relations, you will take a risk that you might get punished by your protests. But it's also the case that you are trying to shift the relationship and you're trying to show that what looks like a neutral rule is not operating in a neutral way at all because people are not always similarly situated. Now, take that to race. There are often times when, and I was a law student, when the dean of the law school told me that the reason why we didn't have many women and many faculty of color was that they just weren't qualified based on the neutral rules. Well, when we started looking at the rules, they weren't so neutral at all. They were rules that basically said you're qualified if you went to Harvard. Well, there was a period of time where women weren't admitted at all to Harvard, and very, very few people of color were admitted at all. So it meant that a facially neutral rule, we don't ask what your race or your gender is, actually ended up being discriminatory because it was based on a backdrop that was never race or gender neutral. So you just build a policy on top of inequalities that everybody knew existed. That's not functionally equal, even though it is colorblind or gender blind. And I'll fast forward and just say in our country right now, we are dealing in a situation where the Supreme Court has just struck down a major law that was designed to protect Black and brown voters against discrimination. That law took race into account because race had often been used to diminish access to the ballot, to diminish the power that groups and communities had to elect someone of their choice. And many times these rules were supposedly colorblind. Even in the 19th century, when our government, state governments used the grandfather clause to disenfranchise African Americans, it was colorblind. It was a colorblind rule, but it was explicitly an effort to suppress Black voting because at the time, the grandfather clause basically said you could vote if your grandfather would vote. What was done at a time when the grandfathers of most Black people were enslaved people and they couldn't vote. So there you have another example of a rule that looks like it's colorblind. It looks like it's symmetrical. But because of history, because of the context, it's not race neutral at all. It's designed to do exactly what it did, which was disenfranchise millions of African Americans.
So what is the answer to those people who, who dismiss critical race theory, partly because of the myths that have been created around it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that critical race theory means all white people are racist by virtue of being white.
Yes.
That all white people have privilege.
Yes.
You know, is any of that true?
No, it's not true. There's no all in anything, first of all. But, I'll say two things. One thing is I encourage people to read. Reading is so fundamental, and not just reading the things that the critics have to say. Actually read the things that critical race theorists have to say and make your own judgment about whether critical race theory is actually saying the things that the detractors say. All too often, the problem is that the extremists come up with a rap on an idea. And it's not fact checked. It's not subject to any kind of a critical inquiry. It just gets reported. And then the mainstream media pick up the controversy and just say, this is a controversial idea, or, this is what the idea is. Do you agree with it or not? Without actually saying, is this really the idea? And I'll add to that once extremists are able to label a group of people in distorted ways, many times that group of people become the subject of the media's interrogation rather than people who actually get to speak for themselves. I can't tell you how many times a story has been done about what critical race theory people think. The critics get to talk but we don't get to talk. That is an imbalance. That's another asymmetry that produces these distortions that never have the opportunity to really be interrogated. And the last thing I would say is this, and this is what I do a lot of times with large audiences. I will give them scenarios in which it's pretty clear that race is playing a role, but not explicitly. What's an example? In the United States, if you try to get your property evaluated and your property is seen as being racialized, it's Black property, you might get less in the effort to evaluate the property than if you take all your pictures out of the living room, all your textiles out, and you get a white friend to come and get your property assessed. Many times, many times, the property value will suddenly go up. Why is that? So I'll ask people, if you think the answer to that question is it was just a mistake, it was an incorrect placement of a decimal, then sit down. You are not a critical race theorist. But if you know that one of the main ways that Black property in the United States or brown property is undervalued because of the way that markets actually devalue property owned by Black people or property in Black neighborhoods, keep standing, because you're probably a critical race theorist. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be an advocate. You don't have to be an activist. You just have to be literate about the way that race works in this world to be called a critical race theorist. Now, do you want people to take away your capacity to think critically about what this scenario is telling you? If you want that taken away, or you don't want to help your children or other people understand how race might be working, then okay, you are an opponent to critical race theory. But if you think this is literacy that we need to be able to hold on to identify when race is denying people opportunity, then you're on our side on this debate.
So what do you think is going on now? Because you have this essay, the epilogue at the back of this memoir, which is pretty bleak, to be honest, about why your ideas and the ideas of your colleagues are so under attack.
Well, it's bleak because we've been here before, and one wants to think that lessons from the past are available to help us navigate the future. Unfortunately, the reality in the United States is there's been a constant faction in American society that has preferred to break the nation rather than share it on an equitable basis. That's what the Civil War was about, as it's called, the war between the states, if you're a Southerner, or the war of Northern aggression, if you're really a Southerner, rather than it was a war fought over the right of white slaveholders to hold Black people in perpetuity. It was a war fought over the idea about whether people who were enslavable could ever be citizens of the United States. This was a decision that the Supreme Court made in Dred Scott. So this war was a war that was fought on behalf of those who'd rather break away from the United States than to rethink this question about whether the ownership of other people based on race was ever legitimate in a democracy and whether it should extend indefinitely into the future. This same faction overthrew Reconstruction, which created citizenship for everybody. This same faction denied people the right to vote on the basis of race. So this faction has always been there. It has sometimes been more powerful and other times less powerful. It lost power in the 20th century. It lost power when Brown versus Board of Education was decided that said segregation in public education was unconstitutional. It lost power when the Voting Rights Act was decided. And now it regained power with the Trump administration, both of them, with the idea that America was better before people like me were free, before there were laws that prevented discrimination. And so in this effort to recreate an America before all of these things happened, the strategy is to erase the history of what life was like for most people back then to erase the rationale for having aggressive civil rights protections and to erase the function of race consciousness so we can see those areas where the shadows of that past are still casting themselves into this moment and into the future. So yeah, they want to erase the history, the ideas, those of us who are back talkers, in order to make this a comfortable return to an intolerable past.
And they want to take away the ability to teach or discuss intersectionality, critical race theory
Absolutely.
in education.
And actually, I have to say on that note, I'm not surprised. One of the reasons that chapter is bleak is it's not because of MAGA per se. They're on brand. They're doing what the president has asked them to do, to take us back to the past. My discomfort is with stakeholders of racial justice and gender justice, people who are deeply, deeply distressed about the deterioration of our democracy, yet do not see these efforts to censor what people can read and have access to erase ideas that have embraced the aspirations for a more livable, more equitable future. They have instead believed that it's better to pivot, better to acquiesce, better to comply, sometimes in advance, even though all the evidence shows that anticipatory compliance, which is what Timothy Snyder calls it, does not protect us. It does not protect us as individuals, as institutions, and as a democracy. So I call for backtalking as a way to contest these ideas, not just the ideas from MAGA, but those who think that this is going to pass, like it's a flu. It's not a flu. There's no bottom to this until we create the bottom and start talking back to the descent that we find ourselves in right now.
You have a particularly devastating chapter on your participation in President Obama's project for young Black men. Why was he such a disappointment?
Well, I have to modify that. I was and remain proud that Obama occupied the White House. I was and remain proud that our nation was able to overcome some of the limitations in political possibility, which is what his election represents. So that is not a disappointment. The conditions upon which he was felt himself constrained in being the first Black president, that is where the disappointment rests. The president was known to say, "I'm not the president of just Black America. I'm the president of all America," which of course was true. But it also didn't mean that Black America and other marginalized groups shouldn't have legitimately expected that the president would be able to speak to things that were specifically historically presented as ongoing obstacles to Black, brown, and other marginalized people. So there was this sense that to be president for everybody meant that our expectations about how he might address the historical disadvantages would be diminished. And that was disappointing. Yet when Trayvon Martin, who was a young 14-year-old African-American boy, was killed by a vigilante who saw himself as protecting his neighborhood, there was an outcry. I mean, it was palpable. The distress and the feeling that we were back in the 50s when Emmett Till, another 14-year-old, was lynched basically by white vigilantes. So there was really a demand, an expectation, a hope that late in his second term, he would begin to address some of the ways that the structures in which Black people lived, brown people lived, needed to be addressed. So when Trayvon Martin was killed and President Obama did indicate he was going to say something about it, do something about it, there was hope. I was hopeful. what he ended up doing was effectively saying that, this case is over. The justice system did what the justice system was, set out to do. So that was, first of all, deeply disappointing to me and many of us who had been very critical of the criminal justice system. There's this saying that we went to the courthouse and all we saw was just us, not just justice. And so that seemed to be playing out in that moment, but he pivoted away from that and pivoted away from other structural things that were happening that contributed to Black boys and Black girls being left behind, the defunding of public education, the erosion of civil rights protections, the increasing isolation of low-income people of color. All of these were structured dimensions of disadvantage, and none of these things were things that he felt comfortable addressing.
I mean, wasn't the risk, I suppose, that had he said what you wanted him to say as America's first Black president, he may have incited nationwide riots?
I doubt that there was a risk of rioting. There was,
if he'd have said the system is stacked against you,
yes,
it was never going to deliver justice, why wouldn't people have risen up?
So people don't rise up when people acknowledge the inequality. The rising up usually comes when the system says, this is what it is, this is all it is, deal with it. Those have been the moments when riots have happened. To go back to the question you asked earlier about Martin Luther King, there weren't riots when Black folks tried to march to Selma in order to agitate for civil rights. At least there weren't riots from Black folks. There were riots from the police who tried to beat Black people into submission. The riots, when they came when Martin Luther King was assassinated, when all hope of substantially changing, when even the acknowledgement or the recognition that there was an injustice was suffocated, which was wiped out. So the acknowledgement of injustice has never been the moment or the spark that created unrest. It was the repression of those who were peacefully trying to create change. So I don't think the real risk was riot. I think the real risk, and this was one of the things that I think held a lot of people's tongue during the first administration. The risk was he would lose support among many white voters who believed him to be the post-racial president. And they thought post-racial meant all this race stuff is behind us. We don't have to think about it anymore. We don't have to talk about it anymore. Heck, we don't need these laws anymore because, we've hit the bell. It's over. And a lot of Black folks knew that that wasn't true, but thought as though, okay, maybe we're going to have to act as if, or hope that on the side or in incremental ways, there would be some acknowledgement of the ongoing dimension of racial inequality. But now we're talking about the second term. We're not talking about, an impending election. We're talking about the final years of the second term. And we're talking about some things that were happening that were clearly, racist things. So to not be able to address that and to instead frame it as these racial problems are the product of boys not having mentors or boys not having father figures. And we can address that with internships or little clubs. It was problematic both because the problem was not the absence of fathers. In fact, the data show that Black fathers are actually more involved in their children's lives than other fathers. So it was just a myth. But the second thing is it was a myth that led to the exclusion of girls and women. And because they were excluded, it was easier to deny that there were structural dimensions to racial inequality and instead focus on behavioral or cultural dimensions. And that goes all the way back to, unfortunately, the 60s. So that's one of the reasons why we had to say something. We can't go backwards in order to move forward.
Just finally, I mean, clearly what you've laid out are structural challenges which require structural answers. But for individuals, I guess what you're saying is what you can do is talk back.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you can resist the requirement that you act as if the world is different from what you know it to be. You can resist those who try to infantilize you. You can resist those who tell you that your history is insignificant, your story is irrelevant, your aspirations are unrealizable. I mean, that's just minimalist backtalking for your own interests. And if we do it collectively, it turns out that there is a critical mass to fight back. Right now, the question is this a war that can be won? The one thing that we know for sure is if we're not showing up on the battlefield, it can't be won. And so our only choice is to show up, bend that arc of the moral universe towards justice. It takes hands to do it. It's not going to do it on its own.
Kimberly Crenshaw, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.
All right. Well, I think that's gonna be a wrap. I enjoyed it, folks. Thanks everyone for stopping by. Let's thank our executive producers. Dirty Dude, and I'm sorry, Lupin, CKJ3, and Speak Radio. I will be back somewhere around 4 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock tomorrow. If you're hearing this on a replay, make sure you do hit the like button, support the show. By the way, I meant to mention, Mela, if you hear this, I did get your emails. Thanks for that. And I will see everybody tomorrow.